Hey, you found us.
Welcome, everybody.
This is Scripture Gems. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is John Fullmer and this is my brother Jay.
How's it going, John?
We are two brothers who just can't get enough of the Scriptures.
Yeah, we love them.
This episode, we are going over the Come Follow Me lesson for August 3rd through 9th, 2020. This is covering Alma, chapters 43 through 52. And now, let's bring out the star of the show, the Scriptures. Boy, do we need you here today. So glad
excited.
You're here. And now let's consult the Scripturematic 6000 to find out how long it will take to read this week's reading. Whoa, what was that? Did we blow a vacuum tube?
Maybe it was an outer tie rod.
An hour, 34 minutes, 18 seconds? Whoa.
Woo-hoo-hoo! Nelly.
Wow. Okay, I think we have a new record. This is the longest reading assignment we've had all year. But Don't freak out, people. You can do this. You have been practicing week after week, and now it's into August. You've gotten really good at maybe breaking it up. So I would encourage you, especially with this one, to break it up. And if you did break it up, the daily assignment would be 13 minutes, 28 seconds.
That ain't
It's
nothing.
still a lot, but for a daily, think of what you might be able to sacrifice every day just to make sure you read the Scriptures. And one of the things that will make it easy is that these chapters are exciting.
There is packed with story.
So much adventure and story in these chapters, it'll go by like nothing.
Yeah, now I've got to let you know that normally in a classroom setting, we just touch on a couple things in these chapters and move on. We're not going to do that. So
we're not.
These time codes here, look at all these. They're like a million time codes. Go ahead and take it day by day. We do not know how long this show is going to turn out, but it's going to be our longest show.
Yeah, I think we can confidently say, even though we haven't finished recording yet, this will be our longest show. And for those of you who have been with the show for a long time and you've been through the 2nd Nephi 12 to 25 episode or the Alma 17 to 22 episode, you know that means something.
Yeah.
This is going to be a long show.
We will be here the whole time. But feel free to just jump from chapter to chapter. If you read a little bit each day, just listen to those chapters and we can go on. But we're happy to have you with us the whole time. Let's just get into it.
We'll be here when you get back.
Yeah.
All right. Now, 3 weeks ago on Scripture Gems, we have the Zoramites who have descended from the Nephites and moved to a place called Antionum, which is near the Lamanite borders. Okay? Then we have Alma and the Dream Team, who go to preach to the Zoramites. This is covering Alma chapters 31 to 35, okay? This is a couple of lessons ago. The poorer class of people among the Zoramites listened and repented. And the wealthier class didn't like that, and so they banished the believers, the exiles. The exiles wandered over to Jershon, to the people of Ammon, and they were extra nice to them. Surprise, surprise. The Zoramites were furious that the people of Ammon were nice to them. So they threatened the people of Ammon to stop being nice to these people, and the people of Ammon ignored them. Well, so the Zoramites prepare for war. And that is the purpose of the war coming up. Now, the people of Ammon, they are not going to fight, right? Because they have taken the oath that they are not going to take up weapons against anyone anymore. So they move to Melech, closer to the capital of the Nephite nation. Now, the Zoramite exiles are staying in Jershon to fight. They have not taken the oath, and they're ready to help the Nephites. And so that brings us to where we're at. Now, the Lamanites are going to be involved soon. Why they're involved, we're not really clear, except that they've always had a hatred towards the Nephites and have been taught from generation to generation that the Nephites have robbed them of their right to government and other such things. And so we're just assuming that if they have an opportunity to attack the Nephites, they'll take it.
Yeah.
This brings us to Alma chapter 43. Verse 1, And now it came to pass that the sons of Alma did go forth among the people to declare the word unto them. And Alma also himself could not rest, and he also went forth. So there's still preaching going on in the nation of the Nephites. He says the sons of Alma. I would assume that's all three, Helaman, Shiblon, and Corianton.
Yeah, and we do find out later that Corianton, there's specific mention of him as a missionary. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's great. So starting in verse 3, Mormon starts to take us back to this impending war that he talked about in chapter 35. It's the 18th year of the reign of the judges. The Zoramites become Lamanites, mentioned in verse 4, and the Lamanites bring their forces into Antionum. Now, this is exactly what the Nephites feared would happen. The leader of the Lamanite and Zoramite combined forces is a man named Zarahemnah, and he deliberately appoints Amalekites to be captains over his forces because they, quote, are a more wicked and murderous disposition.
Isn't that an interesting job description? Like, hey, we're looking for a leadership position. We're really looking for wicked and murderous dispositions. Somebody comes in with flour in his pocket. They're like, I'm sorry, you're just not who we're looking for.
Right. What they want here is to make sure that whatever happens, people aren't going to change their minds. You know, we have that story back in the days of the people of Ammon, and they recognize that one of their targets here are the people of Ammon, that past attacks on the people of Ammon have resulted in particularly the Lamanites realizing, hey, we're killing our brothers here. We shouldn't do this. We want to make sure that whoever's in charge is going to make sure that that hatred and that murderousness is preserved.
Stoke the fires.
That's right. So Zarahemnah's goal, Nephite subjection. He is trying to conquer the Nephite nation.
That is his end goal. But what's interesting to me in verse 8 is how it points out that Zarahemnah, the steps in which he gets there, Zarahemnah stirs up anger of the Lamanites against the Nephites. Why? So that he can have power over the Lamanites. It's an interesting observation that if you want to get power over a people, stir them up to anger against somebody else. It said nothing makes an us like a them. So if you can create a them and create hatred against another, so however we slice each other, there's so many different identities that we have. If you pick something and then stir up people to anger against that, you have power over them. And that then, as you stir up anger against them, ultimately then it says that it will lead to the bondage. But they even used the phrase great power. Getting people to hate other people gives you great power over those people.
For those of you who have studied world history, in particular the wars, this might sound familiar to you, particularly in like World War II, with the use of wartime propaganda. The Germans were particularly well known for dropping leaflets from the sky and having radio stations and other such things continually blare their hatred messages of, well, these people are the reason why your life is hard and we need to win in order for our lives to be better, this type of thing. And that's the type of message that I suspect that Zarahemnah is spreading among his people. It's very effective.
To be fair, it is effective, and it gives leaders like Hitler in World War II and others, it gives them power over their people so that they can use those people to bring their enemies into bondage. That's something that happens not only throughout history, but it certainly happens today.
Yes, and please don't get me wrong. I am not singling out Hitler at all. He was just an easy example. There are several examples, even in just the 20th century.
Yeah, he was good at it, for sure.
So now into verse 9, we talked about Zarahemnah's goal. The Nephite goal is self-preservation. If the Lamanites won, they would eliminate the Nephites' religion, so they're defending their faith. They're also defending the Ammonites, the people of Ammon, who will, of course, not take up arms to go to war. But the Ammonites are fulfilling the promise that they had originally made with the Nephites in the sense that they are doing their best to support the armies of the Nephites and providing them provisions and this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting message that I found in the Old Gospel Doctrine Manual from then Elder David O. McKay, and this is significant because this was given in General Conference during World War II, April 1942. He says, quote, "There are two conditions which may justify a truly Christian man to enter, mind you, I say enter, not begin, a war. 1, an attempt to dominate and to deprive another of his free agency and 2, loyalty to his country. Possibly there is a third, namely, defense of a weak nation that is being unjustly crushed by a strong, ruthless one. End quote. This is interesting because it kind of applies all three in a way to this whole story. We'll be talking about elements of, certainly the Lamanites attempting to conquer the Nephites. That is category 1 there. The concept of being loyal to your country and fighting as they are needed. And 3, protecting a weak nation, in this case, the people of Ammon who are refusing to fight. This is going to be a worthy battle, certainly.
Yeah, for sure.
So going on in verse 15, it begins. The Lamanites come to the border of Jershon, and a young 25-year-old captain named Moroni leads the Nephite forces.
Yeah! That's
Moroni
awesome.
is going to be the man throughout this whole thing.
For many of us, we've waited for a long time for him to show up in the story. Now, just to be clear, it could well be that he's 25 years old at this year, but it does say that he was 25 when he became chief captain, and I'm not sure when that is. We know that the last chief captain that has been mentioned was a chief captain Zoram. He had 2 sons, Aha and Lehi. This was back in Alma 16, and that was the 11th year of the reign of the judges. So that was not that long ago from where we are in the story now for the 18th year of the reign of the judges.
True. So Moroni could be as old as 32 if he was appointed shortly after.
Sure, but there's no
period.
reason to think that, Zoram didn't continue to serve. And who knows when maybe it was, in fact, this year when it happened. I just wanted to throw that out there. And to throw out that the previous captain, Zoram, his son Lehi, may well be the Lehi we're going to talk about in today's lesson, one of my favorite heroes, Captain Lehi.
Yeah.
And there's so many reasons to love him, but it may well be that he's already been serving for a while under his father. Anyway.
No, that's a good point. And I don't want to get ahead of the story, but certainly put a pin in it for Lehi.
Uh-huh. He'll be back.
So the Nephites approach the battle. They approach the border of Jershon, and they are fully armored. They have all kinds of armor laid out, and the Lamanites are completely naked other than a loincloth.
Yeah, in the past, there's been, and I think this is as good a time as any, I'll post this in the description. I've created a PDF document. It was for myself, but if anybody's interested, I'll share it with you. It goes through all of the scriptures that relate to armor, weapons, fortifications throughout the Book of Mormon and organizes them by time period. And then I've done drawings of the things listed, plus I have the scriptures there. And it's interesting to note that the Nephites and Lamanites, prior to this, have some form of armor. But what Moroni does with the armor here is never been done before. This is brand new. And it's also interesting that although the Lamanites are just wearing a loincloth, the Nephite dissenters, the Amalekites, Zoramites, they are not. They actually have whatever the earlier Nephite armor was, but Captain Moroni elevated this. But how interesting that the Nephite dissenters are like, okay, you guys can go out there with nothing. We're going to dress up a little bit more.
At least protect ourselves a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
They do not care about the people they are stirring up to anger and hate.
Well, and think about this, too. The Lamanites appear to have won a lot of previous battles just by sheer number.
Right.
And so they are willing to allow the flexibility of movement to be wearing nothing but a loincloth, just assuming that, we may lose, a percentage of our forces, we'll still win overall because there are so many of us. Well, even though there are so many of them, they approach the Nephites in their armor, and they're afraid now.
Yeah, and just look at the opposite side of that. What's Captain Moroni? How does he feel about his men? Well, he's trying to protect them, lift them up, strengthen them. There's no listing of a difference between how the officers and the foot soldiers are armored. And, back to what we talked about with the sons of Mosiah, they didn't have a desire to slay the Lamanites. They wanted to save them. These leaders, the Zoramites, the Amalekites, they don't care about the Lamanites.
Moroni is a particularly innovative military leader, but all of his innovations surround around protecting his people.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
Well, let's jump into the verses.
Oh,
now.
my gosh. Look
Jay,
at this.
You want to start us off here in verse 22?
So, verse 22 in Alma 43, Behold, now it came to pass that they durst not come against the Nephites in the border of Jershon. You bet they durst not. Therefore, they departed out of the land of Antionum into the wilderness, and took their journey round about in the wilderness, away by the head of the river Sidon. Now, we'll show this on the map. The river Sidon, the head waters are in the narrow strip of wilderness that separate Nephite and Lamanite lands, that they might come into the land of Manti and take possession of the land. For they did not suppose that the armies of Moroni would know whither they had gone. But it came to pass that as soon as they had departed, and look at what Moroni does, into the wilderness, Moroni sent spies into the wilderness to watch their camp. And Moroni, also knowing of the prophecies of Alma, sent certain men unto him. See, we've got this notion already of saying, okay, let's keep an eye on what our enemies are doing. Let's be aware, and then let's consult what the Lord has to say about this. Knowing of the prophecies of Alma, sent certain men unto him, desiring him that he should inquire of the Lord, whither the armies of the Nephites should go to defend themselves against the Lamanites. And it came to pass that the word of the Lord came unto Alma, and Alma informed the messengers of Moroni that the armies of the Lamanites were marching round about in the wilderness, that they might come over into the land of Manti, that they might commence an attack upon the weaker part of the people. And those messengers went and delivered the message unto Moroni. Now Moroni, leaving a part of his army in the land of Jershon, lest by any means a part of the Lamanites should come into that land and take possession of the city, took the remaining part of his army and marched over into the land of Manti. And he caused that all the people in that quarter of the land should gather themselves together to battle against the Lamanites, to defend their lands and their country, their rights and their liberties. Therefore they were prepared against the time of the coming of the Lamanites. That's another thing that I really like about him too, is he doesn't just do things for people. He gets into people's lands and he says, do you guys want freedom? Well, stand up and fight with me.
Well, and notice that he gathers them into one body.
Yeah.
Think about a marauding army coming into a city and all the people in the city are scattered all over the place. That's a lot easier for an army to take over. They're picking off a little people at a time.
Yeah.
Where if they're in one body, now they're a force to be reckoned with.
And think about that with ideologies and beliefs and morals.
Mm-hmm.
How much more powerful are we if we can join our voices together with like-minded people?
Absolutely.
Verse 27, And it came to pass that Moroni caused that his army should be secreted in the valley which was near the bank of the river Sidon, which was on the west of the river Sidon in the wilderness. And Moroni placed spies round about that he might know when the camp of the Lamanites should come. It's interesting that he's looking for the spies to know when they should come. It seems pretty obvious to them where. We talked about this in past episodes, but you don't get to cross a river any place. There are certain places that are crossings, and this crossing seems to have already been mentioned back in the days of Chief Captain Zoram back in Alma 16. It seems that that crossing battle is going to be happening right there again this time. So now, as Moroni knew the intention of the Lamanites, that it was their intention to destroy their brethren or to subject them and bring them into bondage, that they might establish a kingdom unto themselves over all the land, and he also knowing that it was the only desire of the Nephites to preserve their lands and their liberty and their church, therefore he thought it no sin that he should defend them by stratagem. I don't know why he would even be worried about using stratagem.
Yeah, isn't all's fair in love and war?
Yeah.
I mean, that's always been an interesting thing to me. Just a quick aside, if you look up stratagem in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, you get an artifice, particularly in war, a plan or scheme for deceiving an enemy. So perhaps there was a concern that his strategies where warfare was concerned would be considered disingenuous to his enemies.
Yeah.
That's taken honesty and integrity to a level that I can't comprehend, actually. My hat is off to him, but there you go.
That's amazing. So he's ready now for them. He's got all of his armies in place, and you can see it here on the visual. All right, let's continue with verse 34. But looking over this, so Captain Moroni has secreted his armies on the west of the river, and he's taken and put another army, led by a man whose name was Lehi,
There he is.
on the east and the south of this hill called Riplah. So he's hiding there. Yeah, and there's Captain Lehi. So, and then he took the rest of his armies and put them down on the path going down toward Manti. So now, when the armies come upon the north of the hill, like it says in verse 34, it came to pass that when they saw the Nephites, this is verse 36, coming upon them in their rear, they turned about and began to contend with the army of Lehi. And the work of death commenced on both sides, but it was more dreadful on the part of the Lamanites. Why? Because their nakedness was exposed to the heavy blows of the Nephites and their swords and their scimitars, which brought death almost at every stroke. While on the other hand, there was now and then a man fell among the Nephites by their swords and the loss of blood, they being shielded from the more vital parts of the body, or the more vital parts of the body being shielded from the strokes of the Lamanites by their breastplates and their arm shields and their head plates. And by the way, I don't really know what a head plate is, but either way, these shields are meant to protect these parts of the body. I've got a drawing here that can give us some ideas, but either way, the most vital parts Moroni has made sure were protected. Thus the Nephites did carry on the work of death among the Lamanites. Okay, so the Lamanites are frightened. They're pushed into the river. They cross the river, and there on the other side is Captain Moroni. They fight and then begin to flee from Captain Moroni's men down toward Manti, and they are met by, of course, that other group that were hid. And there begins one of the most ferocious battles. Understand now that Zarahemna's Lamanite army, as numerous as they are surrounded. They've got armies on the north. They've got Captain Moroni on the south. Lehi's across the river. And I think I would have given up. But because...
they've got nowhere to go.
No, but because of the leaders that were put in place, remember the job description?
Right. Wicked and murderous disposition.
Look at what it does. In verse 43, now in this case the Lamanites did fight exceedingly. Yea, never had the Lamanites been known to fight with such exceedingly great strength and courage. No, not even from the beginning. And they were inspired by the Zoramites and the Amalekites, who were their chief captains and leaders, and by Zarahemna, who was their chief captain, or their chief leader and commander. Yea, they did fight like dragons, and many of the Nephites were slain by their hands. Yea, for they did smite in two many of their head plates. They did pierce many of their breastplates. They did smite off many of their arms. He's painting a picture for you of what it means to fight like dragons. For your enemy to fight like this, here they were armored and protected, and yet they're so ferocious that they're blasting through all of that. They did smite off many of their arms. Thus the Lamanites did smite in their fierce anger. Now, we talked about this back in the days of Zenith, back in Mosiah, how the Lamanites fought like lions for their prey, but Limhi and his men were trying to defend their families, and they fought like dragons. And now we see what that looks like when the Lamanites are attacking and fighting like dragons. It's horrifying. So with that intensity, you can imagine why, if you jump ahead to verse 48, look at the response of Captain Moroni's men to this, understanding that they've got their enemies surrounded and they're better armored. And it came to pass that when the men of Moroni saw the fierceness and the anger of the Lamanites, they were about to shrink and flee from them. Wow! That also gives you an idea, because you know they're fighting for a better cause. You know, those intervening verses, it talks about that they're fighting for, not for power, but for liberties and their wives and their children and their worship, and they're on the Lord's side. The Lord said you can, defend your homes and stuff. So everything they're doing is on the side of right, and yet they're just horrified by what they're up against. But then if you continue on in 48, Moroni, perceiving their intent, sent forth and inspired their hearts with these thoughts, the thoughts we talked about before, the wives and liberty and their religion, yea, the thoughts of their lands, their liberty, their freedom from bondage. In 49, and it came to pass that they turned upon the Lamanites, and they cried with one voice. Remember that idea about unifying everyone together, unto the Lord their God for their liberty and their freedom from bondage. And they began to stand against the Lamanites with power. And in that self-same hour that they cried unto the Lord for their freedom, the Lamanites began to flee before them. And they fled even unto the waters of Sidon. That power, if we compare this animal comparison back with Limhi's people, the Lamanites fought like lions, they fought like dragons. We see the Lamanites here fighting like dragons, and it's so horrifying that even when you have every advantage, it makes you want to flee. The only thing that has power over that is the power of God. And when they called upon the Lord with one voice, they began to stand with power against their enemies. And their enemies fled from them.
That's how you stand up to a dragon.
That is how you stand up to a dragon. And so there it is. We've got them. They fled to the waters of Sidon. They're on the bank. They've got Lehi on one side, the armies of Moroni on the other. And that's when Moroni commands his men to stop the shedding of blood, and he talks to the Lamanites.
Now, before we go on, there's a note in these later verses to remind us that there are more than twice the number of Lamanites as Nephites.
Yeah.
But they are completely surrounded.
Yeah.
And backed up against the river.
All right, let's give the microphone to Captain Moroni.
We do not desire to be men of blood. You know that ye are in our hands, yet we do not desire to slay you. We have not come out to battle against you that we might shed your blood for power. Neither do we desire to bring anyone to the yoke of bondage. But this is the very cause for which you have come against us. And ye are angry with us because of our religion. Ye behold that the Lord is with us. He has delivered you into our hands. This is done unto us because of our religion and our faith in Christ. And now ye see that you cannot destroy this, our faith. Zarahemnah, I command you in the name of that all-powerful God, that ye deliver up your weapons of war unto us, and we will spare your lives, if ye will go your way and come not again to war against us. But if ye do not this, I will command my men that they shall fall upon you and inflict the wounds of death, that ye may become extinct. And then we will see who shall have power over this people. Then we will see who shall be brought into bondage.
Here are our weapons of war. We will deliver them up to you. But we will not suffer ourselves to take an oath unto you. But take our weapons of war and suffer that we may depart into the wilderness. Otherwise, we will retain our swords and we will perish or conquer.
The conflict. I cannot recall the words which I have spoken. Therefore, as the Lord liveth, ye shall not depart, except ye depart with an oath, that ye will not return again against us to war. Now as you're in our hands, we will spill your blood upon the ground, or ye shall submit to the conditions which I have proposed.
Even as this scalp has fallen to the earth, which is the scalp of your chief, so shall ye fall to the earth, except ye will deliver up your weapons of war and depart with a covenant of peace.
Now there were many, when they heard these words and saw the scalp which was upon the sword, that were struck with fear. And many came forth and threw down their weapons of war and beat Moroni.
And as many as entered into a covenant, they suffered to depart into the wilderness. Now, this video is an old seminary video. Many of you may recognize it. We thought it would be fun to resurrect it for the show. If you haven't seen it, maybe you enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty fun.
It's called Firm in the Faith of Christ from 1993.
Fantastic.
So now Zerahemnah stirs up the Lamanites to contend more powerfully. Okay, he realizes that we're in trouble, but we've got to stir up that dragon-like fight again, right? Moroni is angry at their stubbornness because he's made it clear, look, I'll let you go, but you've got to surrender your weapons and promise not to come back anymore. That's all that he wanted. So now he commands his men to slay them. And the Lamanites have no armor, so they fall very quickly like they had previously. And when Zerahemnah finally realizes that they're about to be destroyed, he changes his mind and submits to Moroni's conditions. Moroni commands his men to cease slaying, they collect the weapons of war, and after the Lamanites enter into a covenant of peace, they are allowed to depart into the wilderness. The dead on both sides could not be numbered and was buried in the river Sidon. That had to have been a horrible scene.
Yeah, no kidding.
So now Moroni and his men return home. That was the end of the battle. Verse 24 tells us that that's the end of the 18th year of the reign of the judges. So that took all year. And thus ended the record of Alma, which was written upon the plates of Nephi. So wait, are we done with the book of Alma then?
I think there's some more chapters.
Because there appear to be more chapters. If we look at the heading for chapter 45, we find out that the author is now Helaman. Helaman, Alma the younger son, is now keeping the record. Now, why they didn't subdivide this into a book of Helaman, perhaps first Helaman,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
No, not clear.
I don't know.
We have the same thing coming up in Helaman. Helaman only really writes the first little bit, and the rest is written by Nephi. So,
Right.
but here's an interesting thing if we look at Alma's record. This is something that is called an inclusio. It's a literary tool that looks at a structure that is bookended. So you have the certain things at the beginning, you have certain things at the end. Now, if we are correct, and we talked about this in a previous episode, that the Amalekites are actually the Amlicites, then you have a really interesting beginning and end of Alma's record, because it begins in Alma chapter 2 with this battle with the Amlicites, and it ends in 43 and 44 with this battle with the Amlicites being the leaders of the Lamanites. And you have the same motif again. The dead could not be numbered, and they were cast into the river Sidon, both at the beginning of the book of Alma and at the end. It's interesting to note that kind of in the middle, and I don't know what this means, I just find it interesting, is the only Amlicite that we ever find out that is converted. So we have all this hatred and death at the beginning, all this hatred and death at the end, and in between is all this preaching and even going up against antichrists. And yet in the middle, in chapter 23, verse 14, is mentioned one single Amlicite is converted to the Lord. And while we're reflecting back on Alma's record, think about Alma and the sons of Mosiah versus Amalickiah and the Amulonites and his descendants and the Zoramites and Nehor and Korihor. When I was thinking about those people, I was thinking about how the scriptures describe Satan. This is from the Gospel Topics section. Satan is a spirit son of God who was once an angel. Think about these people who were once Nephites, once members of the church, but who rejected. He says an angel in authority in the presence of God. But in the premortal council of heaven, Lucifer, as Satan, as he was then called, rebelled against God. So look at these guys, Amalickiah, Amulonites, Nehor, Korihor. They rebelled against God and his people. And since that time, he has sought to destroy the children of God on the earth and to make them miserable. Again, look at those people. Look at this next part. In Satan's rebellion against God, Satan sought to destroy the agency of man. Well, look at these guys. They want to set themselves up to be kings. They want to have power over others. They want to take away other people's agency. They want to take away freedom. And then in this middle paragraph again, he said, I will redeem all mankind that not one soul shall be lost. Well, that was Nehor's philosophy. It's just remarkable. And then he drew away a third part of the host of heaven. And look at how many people were drawn away by these wicked men. So Alma's record is a battle for the souls of not just the Nephites, but the Lamanites too. In contrast with these other people whose master is Satan. And look at the end for those people. I just thought it was interesting to think about as we close Alma's record. And one more thing, at the end of this Gospel Topics thing on Satan, notice how it says that not only are Satan and his followers cut off from the presence of God, but they're denied the blessing of receiving a physical body. That's what happens to tons of these Lamanites and these dissenters at the beginning and at the end. They are deprived of their physical bodies. Now, I'm not saying that, of course, they'll be resurrected and so forth. It's just a kind of a symbolic connection between Satan and his followers.
Well, and if you want to follow through the entire course of the Lamanite Empire, the fact of the matter is they do eventually win.
Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
But win is a relative term, isn't it?
It is. That depends on what you measure and when.
So let's get into what I'm going to call First Helaman, chapter 45. Verse 1, the Nephite people fast much and pray much and give thanks to the Lord for their deliverance. So thank goodness they are humble about their victory. They have defeated a very large army of the Lamanites and have caused them to take an oath not to come back again. This was a big victory for them, but they recognized that it was actually a big victory for God, and they were expressing their proper gratitude.
Which
Great
is
stuff.
Wonderful. I want to just show you guys this chart as we begin, because we're going to be covering a lot of chapters, and almost all of them are happening in the 19th year of the reign of the judges. So you can see here at the end of the 18th year, we've got that battle with Moroni and Zarahemnah, but then chapters 45, 46, 47, 48, and 49 with these little summary bullet points. That's all happening in 1 year. So just keep that in mind as we go forward.
Yeah, remember when we were going through the book of Omni and we were going through like hundreds of years in just like one chapter? Yeah, we're getting a lot more detail right now.
Yeah.
So verse 2, and it came to pass in the 19th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, that Alma came unto his son Helaman, and said unto him, Believest thou the words which I spake unto thee concerning those records which have been kept? And Helaman said unto him, Yea, I believe. And Alma said again, Believest thou in Jesus Christ, who shall come? And he said, Yea, I believe all the words which thou hast spoken. And Alma said unto him again, Will ye keep my commandments? And he said, Yea, I will keep thy commandments with all my heart. Then Alma said unto him, Blessed art thou, and the Lord shall prosper thee in this land. Now, what an interesting interview. These are things that Alma and Helaman have had to have talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a time of reckoning. This is a time of change. So what is he asking? Do you believe in Jesus Christ? Will you keep my commandments? Do you believe in these records which have been kept?
Yeah. What a great interview to have with your son, with your children.
Yeah. So now why is he going through this interview? Verse 9, but behold, I have somewhat to prophesy unto thee. But what I prophesy unto thee, ye shall not make known. Yea, what I prophesy unto thee shall not be made known, even until the prophecy is fulfilled. Therefore write the words which I shall say. This is neat.
That should fill you with some excitement, because we're about to get it. But nobody else for hundreds of years did. What follows is a prophecy of the end of the Nephites, which no one was allowed to read until after it happened. So that's like more than 400 years in the future. And apparently Mormon has read it and realized that it was being fulfilled and included it for us to read. It's like a secret prophecy. And we encourage you to read it. And when you do, remember, people for hundreds of years were not able to read it.
So those are those next 7 verses, 10 through 16. And we encourage you to read them. We won't read them because we don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, check it out.
So into verse 17, Alma blesses the church. He leaves Zarahemla as if to go to Melech, but then he disappears. And no one knows where he is.
Yeah.
But there's a popular saying amongst the members of the church that Alma was translated, as was Moses, or buried by the hand of the Lord.
I love that the writers of the scriptures, who we always kind of, I seem to attribute to them like they know everything. And they don't know what happened to them. The Lord never made it known to them.
Kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
Going on in verse 20. And now it came to pass, in the commencement of the 19th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, that Helaman went forth among the people to declare the word unto them. So preaching is continuing here.
Mm-hmm.
For behold, because of their wars with the Lamanites, and the many little dissensions and disturbances which had been among the people, it became expedient that the word of God should be declared among them, yea, and that a regulation should be made throughout the church. Therefore Helaman and his brethren went forth to establish the church again in all the land, yea, in every city throughout all the land, which was possessed by the people of Nephi. And it came to pass that they did appoint priests and teachers throughout all the land over all the churches. So, yay! Everything's good.
All
Yay.
right, this is wonderful.
And now it came to pass that after Helaman and his brethren had appointed priests and teachers over the churches, that there arose a dissension among them, and they would not give heed to the words of Helaman and his brethren.
Oh.
Okay, so we got a problem, but they grew proud, being lifted up in their hearts because of their exceeding great riches. Therefore they grew rich in their own eyes, and would not give heed to their words, and walk uprightly before God.
So here's my curiosity. Who's the them that's being talked about in verse 23? Because it could refer to members of the church, but it could also refer to the priests and teachers that Alma and his brethren had appointed. Because later it talks about Alma and his brethren, not specifically these teachers and priests. It could be either one. The most over the churches, that there arose dissension among them, it probably refers to the churches, but it seems like it could also refer to the priests and teachers too.
Yeah.
Uncertain.
Something to think about. So now we move on into chapter 46.
And I would recommend that you don't think of there being a break. Remember, chapters and verses are arbitrary. This narrative really continues to flow from the end of 45 into 46. So let's just keep going with that as if we didn't have a break. But for those of you just joining us, welcome to chapter 46.
Starting in verse 1. And it came to pass that as many as would not hearken to the words of Helaman and his brethren were gathered together against their brethren.
Well, sorry to interrupt again, but these are church members. These aren't enemies and non-Christians against Christians. This is what's happening within the church.
This is a Christian civil war, if you want to think of it.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's crazy. And now behold, they were exceedingly wroth, insomuch that they were determined to slay them.
Slay them? Oh my gosh. Members of the church seeking to slay God's appointed leaders.
Yeah. Now the leader of those who were wroth against their brethren was a large and a strong man, and his name was Amalickiah. Now remember, being a large and a strong man, wasn't that Nehor's thing?
That was Nehor's thing. But remember, too, this guy also, probably as Nehor was, is a member of the church.
Yep, or was.
Was, yeah.
And Amalickiah was desirous to be a king. And those people who were wroth were also desirous that he should be their king. And they were, the greater part of them, the lower judges of the land, and they were seeking for power.
Here we have it again, just like we saw with before with these other guys. They want to take away agency and get power.
And they had been led by the flatteries of Amalickiah that if they would support him and establish him to be their king, that he would make them rulers over the people. Thus they were led away by Amalickiah to dissension, notwithstanding the preaching of Helaman and his brethren, yea, notwithstanding their exceedingly great care over the church, for they were high priests over the church.
Wow.
So we have a great deal of preaching and establishing the church. What went wrong?
Well, that rebellion based on all those blessings, the wealth, the prosperity.
Well, and at the end of the day, you still have your agency.
Yeah.
And as best as the conditions can be, at the end of the day, sometimes people make bad choices.
Yeah, and think about Mormon's point of view as he's reading and writing this. What's going on in Mormon's day that he looks back on this where the church could have been prospering and blessing lives, and yet this rebellion, this falling away, it's got to break his heart.
Well, and we get a taste of that the next few verses. We get Mormon's lesson for us. Remember when we mentioned that when Mormon says, thus we see, or we see, that's time for you to pay attention. Verse 7, and there were many in the church who believed in the flattering words of Amalickiah.
Again, the church. The church is the problem here. They believe his words.
Therefore, they dissented even from the church. And thus were the affairs of the people of Nephi exceedingly precarious and dangerous, notwithstanding their great victory which they had over the Lamanites, and their great rejoicings which they had had because of their deliverance by the hand of the Lord. Quick aside here. When we talk about members of the church dissenting, it's very possible that Amalickiah was not just saying, hey, look, if you make me king, I'll make you sub-kings, and you'll be powerful, and I'll be powerful, and everybody will be great. It's most likely been campaigned as something compassionate.
Oh, sure.
Hey, look at all the problems we have in our society. Boy, if I were king, I would make things better.
Yeah.
I would make them better for me. I would make them better for you.
Yeah.
And that's what leads away the church. But think about this. We talked about back in 1 Nephi about Sariah possibly being overly worried for her sons. But where did it take her? So while there may be people who started following Amalickiah because they thought he was bringing them to a better place or a more compassionate place, but where did it take them?
Right.
Away from the church?
Yeah.
Well, that's not right.
Well, and it may have been, too, as a member of the church, and these people being members of the church, maybe they didn't reject the church, but maybe what he was offering was a worldly version, an easier version. I only mention that because we see that kind of thing, like Nehor's version of religion. But I think you've got a great point. I'm sure he didn't just say, let's be evil.
Right. It's important to remember because we are seeing that today. We are seeing a lot of worldly philosophies being talked about as compassionate or somehow better than
more
what the Lord has
compassionate.
established.
Yeah.
And the reality is, where is that taking you?
Yeah.
Is it taking you away from Jesus Christ and his church? Then it's not good.
Right.
It's not right.
Good point.
Verse 8, thus we see how quickly the children of men do forget the Lord their God. Yea, how quick to do iniquity, and to be led away by the evil one. Yea, and we also see the great wickedness one very wicked man can cause to take place among the children of men. Yea, we see that Amalickiah, because he was a man of cunning device and a man of many flattering words, that he had led away the hearts of many people to do wickedly. yea, and to seek to destroy the church of God, and to destroy the foundation of liberty which God had granted unto them, or which blessing God had sent upon the face of the land for the righteous sake. There's a quote from the Institute Manual from Elder Neal A. Maxwell. This is from his book, Men and Women of Christ. He says, quote, "There are dissenters who leave the church either formally or informally, but who cannot leave it alone. Usually anxious to please worldly galleries, they are critical or at least condescending towards the brethren. They not only seek to steady the ark, but also on occasion give it a hard shove. Often having been taught the same true doctrines as the faithful, they have nevertheless moved in the direction of dissent. They have minds hardened by pride." End quote.
So what's a Captain Moroni to do in the face of this?
Maybe we should go back to that video that we saw earlier.
I think that would be a great idea. Guys, indulge us. Let's take a look at what Captain Moroni does in response to Amalickiah's rebellion.
And it came to pass that he rent his coat, and he took a piece thereof and wrote upon it, in memory of our God, our religion and freedom, our peace, our wives, and our children. And he fastened it upon the end of a pole.
Surely thou shalt not suffer.
Moroni's heart did swell with thanksgiving to his God for the many privileges and blessings which he bestowed upon his people.
Destroy.
And Moroni went forth among the people, waving the rent part of his garment in the air, that all might see the writing.
Whosoever will maintain this title upon the land, let them come forth in the strength of the Lord and enter into a covenant that they will maintain their rights and their religion, that the Lord God may bless them.
And they cast their garments at the feet of Moroni, saying, "We covenant with our God, that we shall be destroyed if we shall fall into transgression."
Behold, we are a remnant of the seed of Joseph, whose coat was rent by his brethren into many pieces. Let us remember to keep the commandments of God, or our garments shall be rent by our brethren, and we be cast into prison. And even shall we ourselves perish if we do not stand fast in the faith of Christ.
And Moroni was a man who was firm in the faith of Christ.
We have the title of liberty to rally the people.
Yeah, this is one of the most famous documents, well, certainly the most famous document written upon a flag or a cloak.
Piece of cloth.
Right, in the Book of Mormon. And so here it is. And as inspiring as it is, it's in response to what Amalickiah stands for. It's the opposite of what he stands for.
So Moroni sends forth throughout the land to rally those who had not dissented to Amalickiah. Amalickiah discovers that his followers are not the majority. He didn't get as big a group of followers as he had hoped. And that some are starting to doubt the justice of his cause. You know, that's a problem. You know, it's a funny thing. We talked about the whole wicked and murderous disposition among the Lamanites. There's no introspection to say, well, you know, if our Lamanite leaders have fought against their brethren and then have essentially, in their perspective, dissented to the other side, maybe our cause isn't just. You know, there's no evaluation there. Anyway, Amalickiah takes those that follow him and go to the land of Nephi.
And that's where the Lamanites
So
are.
now they're going to the Lamanites. Yep. Now Moroni takes his forces and chases Amalickiah, hoping to prevent him from joining with and stirring up the Lamanites.
Remember, he's described as someone with incredibly cunning way with words.
Right. He's a very clever fellow.
Yeah, so he could cause a lot of problems.
He could, and he will.
Yes.
Spoilers. Amalickiah takes a small band of men and flees, leaving the rest of his followers to be captured by Moroni and taken back to Zarahemla. So that's a real class act right there.
Yeah.
Coward.
Yeah, he'll get new friends.
He will. He's good at that. Verse 34, Moroni has elected authority now to judge the Amalickiahites. He causes them to enter into a covenant to maintain a free government. Now, where have we heard that covenant thing before? Moroni's really big on that, right? You know, when he surrounded Zarahemna's men, what was the thing that they needed to do? They needed to turn in their weapons and enter into a covenant of peace. Here, the covenant is to maintain a free government. So yeah, you may not agree with the government, but you have to enter into an oath to maintain it. And if you don't, we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
Now, this may seem kind of severe, but few reject the covenant. And we'll talk more about this a little later, because we're going to run into another civil conflict just a little bit. But Moroni takes the title of liberty, makes copies of it, hangs it on every tower among the Nephites. They have peace until nearly the end of the 19th year of the reign of the judges. So that 19th year, eventful, but at the same time, it ended well. It began well, it ended well.
Well, it depends on where you're living.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Among the Nephites, as far as they know, everything's gone well until nearly the end. But what happens at nearly the end? Some horrible, horrible stuff. Meanwhile, we're about to find out what's been going on since Amalickiah went down to the Lamanites.
Well, and I want to insert a little summary from President Ezra Taft Benson from October 1962 General Conference. This was found in the Institute Manual. He says, quote, "In that sacred volume of Scripture, the Book of Mormon, we note the great and prolonged struggle for liberty. We also note the complacency of the people and their frequent willingness to give up their liberty for the promises of a would-be provider. Moroni, like the prophets whose words are recorded in the Book of Mormon, spoke of the Americas as a chosen land, the land of liberty. He led the people in battle who were willing to fight to maintain their liberty. And the record states that he caused the title of liberty to be hoisted upon every tower which was in all the land. And thus Moroni planted the standard of liberty among the Nephites. This is our need today, to plant the standard of liberty among our people throughout the Americas. While this incident occurred some 70 years BC, the struggle went on through 1,000 years covered by this sacred Book of Mormon record. In fact, the struggle for liberty is a continuing one. It is with us in a very real sense today." End quote. I would like to remind you that was recorded in October 1962. I would suggest that the struggle for liberty has reached a level that would perhaps even surprise President Benson.
Well, it's possible, although it's amazing as I look back in history, including our early church history, how common those patterns seem to be. But regardless,
very true.
We need to continue that fight as Moroni did, as President Benson called for.
Now, Mormon takes a brief diversion at the end of chapter 46. I want to read these verses, starting with verse 39. "And it came to pass that there were many who died, firmly believing that their souls were redeemed by the Lord Jesus Christ. Thus they went out of the world rejoicing. And there were some who died with fevers, which at some seasons of the year were very frequent in the land, but not so much so with fevers, because of the excellent qualities of the many plants and roots which God had prepared to remove the cause of diseases, to which men were subject by the nature of the climate. But there were many who died with old age, and those who died in the faith of Christ are happy in him, as we must needs suppose." It's a very interesting set of verses. kind of gives you some neat insight to their culture that we really don't get. But I think the point that Mormon is trying to say is that generally those who were faithful in Christ would live to be an old age, but even those who didn't went out of the world rejoicing, knowing that their souls were redeemed.
Well, and there's a great parallel there, even though he's talking about physical illness and physical solutions to illness, physical healing. There's a spiritual component to that too. That notion that God has prepared a way for us to be healed from our spiritual fevers, which may be at times frequent in our lives. And yet the Lord has prepared excellent qualities of things that can help us, including, of course, and most importantly, the atonement of Jesus Christ, which gives us healing from diseases that we're subject to by the nature of the climate. What climate? Mortality.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if he intended a subtle double meaning there too.
That's very possible. So let's move on to chapter 47. Now, chapter 47 is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, we're going to spend a little time in here. Understand that all of this is happening. We're going back in time. After Amalickiah, the election didn't work out for him and he fled. Now we're going to follow his story. This is all still going on in the 19th year of the reign of the judges.
Right. Now, I'm glad that Jay brought that up. Remember that Amalickiah is now an outcast. He's escaped, essentially, from Zarahemla. He's not welcome there. Most of his followers are now in prison or who have taken an oath to defend the Nephite nation. And he has a handful of men with him. What does he do? He is a very clever man.
Yeah.
And here we would like to talk about Amalickiah's 8-step plan for world domination. Step 1, control the portion of the army of the Lamanites who are loyal to the king. So let's start reading about that in verse 1. Now we will return in our record to Amalickiah and those who had fled with him into the wilderness. For behold, he had taken those who went with him and went up in the land of Nephi among the Lamanites, and did stir up the Lamanites to anger against the people of Nephi, insomuch that the king of the Lamanites sent a proclamation throughout all his land among all his people that they should gather themselves together again to go to battle against the Nephites.
Okay, now understand who we're talking to here. These Lamanites they're trying to get to battle are many of the same soldiers who had made a covenant of peace with Captain Moroni
in the previous year.
At most a year ago.
Yeah.
Maybe less than that, maybe a matter of months, but no more than a year ago. This is fresh in their minds.
Mm-hmm. And it came to pass that when the proclamation had gone forth among them, they were exceedingly afraid. Yea, they feared to displease the king, and they also feared to go to battle against the Nephites, lest they should lose their lives.
Yeah, and the other part of that might well be, as they're thinking about losing their lives, imagine they're thinking about that battle with Zarahemla and Captain Moroni at the river Sidon in chapter 43 and 44. So it may partly be because of the power of the Nephites, and partly because they will have to break their covenant in order to do this.
Yeah, let's bear in mind that certainly the ancient Middle East is well known for when you make a covenant, especially when you make a covenant that as the Lord liveth and as I live, a very sincere covenant, an oath, you don't break that.
Well, and Captain Moroni must
take that for granted today.
Right. I think the best evidence for the fact that this was a serious thing was that Captain Moroni was willing to let them go if they would covenant with peace. If he thought that they wouldn't make any covenant, and Zarahemla said he's not going to make a covenant that he knows he's going to break. So this was a serious thing for them. And they take it so seriously. Look at what they're willing to do to avoid having to put themselves in that situation.
Right, still in verse 2, and it came to pass that they would not, or the more part of them, would not obey the commandments of the king.
That's treason.
Yeah. And now it came to pass that the king was wroth because of their disobedience. Therefore he gave Amalickiah the command of that part of his army which was obedient unto his commands, and commanded him that he should go forth and compel them to arms. Now, quick aside here. Amalickiah is the one that stirred up the Lamanites?
Yeah.
And so he's the one that announced that there was this problem that they needed to conquer. And so the king of the Lamanites is all on board. Yeah, we need to go and conquer the Nephites. And now his men are not obeying, so he gives power to the person who stirred him up. Amalickiah is no dummy here.
No.
He knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, 47 is pretty much the example of an evil genius.
Yeah, really is. Now behold, this was the desire of Amalickiah. For he, being a very subtle man to do evil, therefore he laid the plan in his heart to dethrone the king of the Lamanites.
So he's being disingenuous.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I mean, certainly the king has given him command over the loyal portion of his army. That was step one, if you'll remember.
Okay.
But he's using this power to dethrone the king, the person who gave him the power. Yeesh. Step two, pretend to follow the king's orders and pursue those who were not loyal. Okay, so he's playing along, right?
Yes.
Verse 5, and now he got the command of those parts of the Lamanites who were in favor of the king, and he sought to gain favor of those who were not obedient. Therefore he went forward to the place which was called Onidah. Remember Onidah? For thither had all the Lamanites fled, for they discovered the army coming, and supposing that they were coming to destroy them, therefore they fled to Onidah, to the place of arms. And they had appointed a man to be a king and a leader over them, being fixed in their minds with a determined resolution that they would not be subjected to go against the Nephites.
Okay, well,
Right? So that's their goal.
Yeah, another thing to point out, they've just created a whole new kingdom.
Right. This was a secession.
Yeah, they've come away, they've created a new king for themselves to be a leader. And look at that determination, fixed in their minds with a determined resolution that they would not be forced to go against the Nephites.
Yeah, remember that. See how long that lasts. And verse 7, and it came to pass that they had gathered themselves together upon the top of the mount, which was called Antipas, in preparation to battle. Now it was not Amalickiah's intention to give them battle according to the commandments of the king, but behold, it was his intention to gain favor with the armies of the Lamanites, that he might place himself at their head and dethrone the king and take possession of the kingdom.
Oh, so he's being disingenuous?
Perhaps. Step 3 in his master plan, secretly surrender to those not loyal to the king's command and become the second in command of the combined forces. Verse 9, and behold, it came to pass that he caused his army to pitch their tents in the valley which was near the Mount Antipas. And it came to pass that when it was night, he sent a secret embassy into the Mount Antipas, desiring that the leader of those who were upon the mount, whose name was Lehonti, that he should come down to the foot of the mount, for he desired to speak with him. And it came to pass that when Lehonti received the message, he durst not go down to the foot of the mount. And it came to pass that Amalickiah sent again, the second time, desiring him to come down. And it came to pass that Lehonti would not. And he sent again the third time. And it came to pass that when Amalickiah found that he could not get Lehonti to come down off from the mount, he went up into the mount, nearly to Lehonti's camp.
Wow.
And he sent again the fourth time his message unto Lehonti, desiring him that he would come down and that he would bring his guards with him.
Okay, this is impressive. He's only asking him to come down a little. Remember how it said he was subtle to do wickedness? Rather than saying, come down all the way, I just want you to come down a tiny bit. Not even halfway, just right outside your camp. Just come down a little bit and bring your guards. What could go wrong?
Yeah, bring your protection.
Yeah.
Verse 13, and it came to pass that when Lehonti came down with his guards to Amalickiah, that Amalickiah desired him to come down with his army in the night time, and surround those men in their camps over whom the king had given him command. And he would deliver them up into Lehonti's hands, if he would make him, Amalickiah, a second leader over the whole army. And it came to pass that Lehonti came down with his men and surrounded the men of Amalickiah, so that before they awoke at the dawn of day, they were surrounded by the armies of Lehonti. And I suppose at this point Amalickiah has to act surprised. Verse 15, and it came to pass that when they saw that they were surrounded, they pled with Amalickiah that they would suffer them to fall in with their brethren, that they might not be destroyed. Now this was the very thing which Amalickiah desired.
Well, I guess so.
And it came to pass that he delivered his men contrary to the commands of the king. Now this was the thing that Amalickiah desired, that he might accomplish his designs in dethroning the king.
So he's being disingenuous?
So it would seem. Step 4, secretly murder the first in charge Lehontai, and by succession become the leader of the combined forces. Verse 17, now it was the custom among the Lamanites, if their chief leader was killed, to appoint the second leader to be their chief leader. I wonder why we're being told this. Verse 18, and it came to pass that Amalickiah caused that one of his servants should administer poison by degrees to Lehontai, that he died. Now when Lehontai was dead, the Lamanites appointed Amalickiah to be their leader and their chief commander.
So he was being disingenuous?
So quick note on that. Administer poison by degrees. First of all, I'd like to point out that Amalickiah didn't administer the poison. He got somebody else to do it for him.
Yeah.
He's big on that. He doesn't like to dirty his hands. So poison by degrees, that means if he would have just poisoned his drink or whatever, it would have been obvious. Here, he's giving just a little bit of poison at a time, and Lehontai is perhaps wondering why his food tastes as bitter as it does, but then dies.
Yeah, well, that notion that, I'm feeling sick, I'm feeling a little down today, my stomach isn't, and all of a sudden, it's got to avoid suspicion. And it seems to have learned something from the Mount Antipas experience. He kept saying, come all the way down, come all the way down. And that didn't work. It was only by getting him by degrees to come down just a little and then a little more. And that seems to be the case here with the poison.
Yeah.
Let's just do a little bit here, a little bit there.
That seems to be a key message here in this particular story. From the Come Follow Me manual, we have a quote from Elder Robert D. Hales from the October 2008 General Conference. He says, quote, the traitorous Amalickiah urged Lehontai to come down and meet him in the valley. But when Lehontai left the high ground, he was poisoned by degrees until he died, and his army fell into Amalickiah's hands. By arguments and accusations, some people bait us to leave the high ground. The high ground is where the light is. It is the safe ground, end quote.
And I should point out that that's a great talk. There's a lot more in there. He talks about that topic. It's a wonderful thing to read in conjunction with this section of Amalickiah's story.
Yeah, the talk is called Christian Courage, the Price of Discipleship.
That one reminded me of another talk given the year after by, at the time, President Uchtdorf. He's speaking about Nehemiah in the Old Testament rebuilding the ruined walls of Jerusalem when the Jews returned there. And he says, but as the walls of the city began to rise, opposition intensified. Their threats were very real, and they grew so intimidating that Nehemiah confessed, quote, they all made us afraid, unquote. In spite of the danger and the ever-present threat of invasion, the work progressed. It was a time of stress for every builder, quote, had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. So imagine that atmosphere. He goes on, as the work continued, Nehemiah's enemies became more desperate. 4 times they entreated him to leave the safety of the city and meet with them under the pretense of resolving the conflict, but Nehemiah knew that their intent was to do him harm. Each time they approached him, he responded with the same answer, quote, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down, close quote. What a remarkable response. Nehemiah refused to allow distractions to prevent him from doing what the Lord wanted him to do.
Another great talk, and that's from April 2009 General Conference.
I love that. And it's interesting, it's 4 times there. It was the 4th time where Lehontai gave in our story. For Nehemiah, all 4 times he resisted, saying that he was doing a great work. These people weren't his friends. They were his enemy.
So now to recap, Amalickiah has gone from being a Nephite exile to the leader of the entire Lamanite army, both those loyal to the king and those not loyal to the king. So step 5, secretly murder the king of the Lamanites, blame it on someone else, and gain the favor of the Lamanite people.
Oh, this is amazing. So continuing on in verse 20, and it came to pass that Amalickiah marched with his armies, for he had gained his desires, to the land of Nephi, to the city of Nephi, which was the chief city. Now, could you picture this in your mind? In order to understand the events here, paint a picture. And the king came out to meet him with his guards. Can you imagine the scene? Out comes the king, looking over this vast army that Amalickiah has brought for him, with his guards. Again, you should feel safe with your guards. For he supposed that Amalickiah had fulfilled his commands, and that Amalickiah had gathered together so great an army to go against the Nephites to battle. But behold, as the king came out to meet him, Amalickiah caused that his servants, these guys are very useful, by the way, should go forth to meet the king. And they went and bowed themselves before the king, as if to reverence him because of his greatness. And it came to pass that the king put forth his hand to raise them, as was the custom with the Lamanites, as a token of peace, which custom they had taken from the Nephites. And it came to pass that when he had raised the first from the ground, behold, he stabbed the king to the heart, and he fell to the earth. Now the servants of the king fled. We need to pause for a minute here. Who are these guys? These guards.
The servants of the king.
Yeah, these servants of the king, these guards. Now the king that we're just talking about here, who's now ended his reign, was established during the events of Alma 28. This was back with the sons of Mosiah, and the king Anti-Nephi-Lehi left with the other people of Ammon and joined the Nephites. Well, this left an opening for a new monarch. And so that was only 4 years ago. That was the 15th year of the reign of the judges, as we learn in Alma 28:7. So now this guy's only been in power for 4 years. And if you're a new king, how would you choose your guards? It'd be nice if there was some kind of a major war where you could test the loyalty and the prowess of your men. Well, do you remember chapter 28? There was a war unlike any that had ever been seen since the days of Lehi. Now, if I was the king, I would have chosen my guards from the heroes of that war. Why am I telling you this? Why are we spending time on this? Well, because one of these guards is named Laman, and we're going to meet him again in chapter 55. But before we do, I want to use our time as we go along to give him some backstory. This guard who came out with the king probably was only in this position for maybe 4 years, and I think very likely, if you want someone that's got the skill, the power, the loyalty, somebody who hates the people of Ammon, this is your guy. For sure, those traits have got to be true. Why else would you choose someone to be your guard? But it's very likely that he was chosen, in my mind, chosen from that battle in 28, where he tried to destroy the people of Ammon from the face of the earth and went up against the Nephites. Okay, so picture in your mind these guards. They're important. And the servants of Amalickiah raised a cry. This is back in 25, saying, "Behold, the servants of the king have stabbed him to the heart, and he has fallen, and they have fled. Behold, come and see." Now, I'm not sure why the servants fled, except if you're seeing this picture that I'm presenting, they are looking out beyond the servants into that sea, that ocean of army, and they recognize that Amalickiah is in power. He controls that army. So there's no reason to stay and fight. I can imagine that they, being powerful men and skillful men and smart, would be fleeing to think, okay, we've got to regroup. We've got to start to get those that are loyal. We've got to, we're going to fight against Amalickiah. But when the servants stand up and say that, they frame them for the king's murder, then that opportunity begins to dry up really fast. In 27, it came to pass that Amalickiah commanded that his armies should march forth. His armies, that's like this ocean of men, march forth and see what had happened unto the king. And when they had come to the spot, and found the king lying in his gore, Amalickiah pretended to be wroth, and he said, "Whosoever loved the king, let him go forth and pursue his servants, that they may be slain." Well, the guards are done. There is now no place in all of the lands of the Lamanites where they can be safe. There's no way to do a rebellion. They've been framed, they've had these testimonies, and everybody has now turned against them. It came to pass in 28 that all they who loved the king, when they heard these words, came forth and pursued after the servants of the king. Now when the servants of the king saw an army pursuing after them, they were frightened again and fled into the wilderness. So what do? You've lost your honor, you've lost your position, any benefits that gave to your family, whether they had a direct family or an extended family. There's nowhere for them to go in all the lands of the Lamanites. Look where they go. And they came over into the land of Zarahemla and joined the people of Ammon. These were the people that had tried again and again to destroy the people of Ammon while they were together in the land. But with nowhere else to go, these guards come over and join the people of Ammon in the Nephite lands. That's remarkable. And the army which pursued after them returned, having pursued after them in vain, and thus Amalickiah, by his fraud, gained the hearts of the people.
I get it now. So he was being disingenuous.
Yeah, I think that's the take-home message. And he's so good at it.
You know, that's the heart of the multi-step plan, is to lie, cheat, and steal, and murder.
Yeah.
To get your way.
So I know it was a little bit of a sidetrack to talk about those guards, but I want you to put a pin in that because we're going to come back to them.
Yeah, probably in the next lesson. So step 6 of his plan, marry the queen and become the king of the Lamanites. And that he did. Verse 35, and it came to pass that Amalickiah sought the favor of the queen and took her unto him to wife. And thus by his fraud and by the assistance of his cunning servants he obtained the kingdom. Yea, he was acknowledged king throughout all the land among all the people of the Lamanites, who were composed of the Lamanites and the Lemuelites and the Ishmaelites and all the dissenters of the Nephites from the reign of Nephi down to the present time. So he did pretty well for himself this year.
Yeah. John, you bring that up. That's a great point. This is a matter of months that he did all this.
This is still in the 19th year of the reign of the judges.
Not only the 19th year, but we're about to get ready to go to war. We know that happens at the end of the 19th year. So, this has been, again, a matter of months. Remarkable.
So step 7 in Amalickiah's plan for world domination, use propaganda to inspire Lamanites to hate the Nephites. Now, before I go into the verses here, I want you to remember that there was a group that had seceded from the Lamanites, Lahantai's group, that were determined not to be forced to go to war against the Nephites. Those people are still here. So what does Amalickiah do for them? This is now chapter 48, by the way. Verse 1. And now it came to pass that as soon as Amalickiah had obtained the kingdom, he began to inspire the hearts of the Lamanites against the people of Nephi. Yea, he did appoint men to speak unto the Lamanites from their towers against the Nephites. Here we go. Just like dropping leaflets from planes, he's got people standing up on towers saying, hey, the Nephites are terrible. They're the reason your life is miserable. We need to get rid of them. Otherwise, we'll never be able to succeed or progress.
Yeah. Wow, the propaganda machine starts rolling out. It's the same thing we were talking about in Alma 43. Influencing people to hate others gives you great power over those people.
Great power.
Yeah.
Now, remember, we had people who were determined not to go to war against the Nephites. What's going to happen, though? Probably as a result of this propaganda and maybe a lot of peer pressure from the culture at the time.
Well, and he did a great job of making the people feel that he loved the king.
Right.
Verse 30 said he gained the hearts of the people. Well, now,
That was part of the steps.
right, and they may be now much more interested in listening to him than before.
Verse 2, and thus he did inspire their hearts against the Nephites, insomuch that in the latter end of the 19th year of the reign of the judges, he having accomplished his designs thus far, yea, having been made king over the Lamanites, he sought also to reign over all the land, yea, and all the people who were in the land, the Nephites as well as the Lamanites. Therefore he had accomplished his design, for he had hardened the hearts of the Lamanites and blinded their minds and stirred them up to anger, insomuch that he had gathered together a numerous host to go to battle against the Nephites. For he was determined, because of the greatness of the number of his people, to overpower the Nephites and to bring them into bondage. He has great power over these people now.
Yeah.
He is a force to be reckoned with.
You know, it doesn't say this directly, but I'm curious if, because he won the hearts of the people, and that he, in verse 3, had hardened the hearts of the Lamanites and blinded their minds, stirred them up to anger. I wonder if part of that, again, thinking of how you can use compassion to steer people in the wrong direction, or seeming compassion. I wonder if he said, you know what, if you've made this covenant, or if you're too scared to go, that's fine. You know, I just want those that love the king and that love their nation. And, you know, I think rather than being the kind of king that says, you must do this, I wonder if he might have been much more subtle with the way he got everybody to come.
I agree with that. We don't have that in the record, but it would make perfect sense with his character to say, hey, if you don't want to come, that's fine. But,
Yeah, we understand.
I really want people who love the king
Yeah.
and love our nation
Yeah.
to come and fight with us. So if that's not you, then,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
That's fine. And it does mention here in verse 3 that he had gathered a numerous host to go to battle against the Nephites. That doesn't necessarily mean that he gathered everybody.
Right. Yeah, you may still have those that really were going to hold to their covenant and so forth. And what a great way to gain favor with the people, to say, you know what, I respect that. And maybe that draws so many more people in. Who knows?
Yeah, could be. All right, so now we're to the final step of Amalickiah's plan for world domination. Step 8, use the Lamanite armies to conquer the Nephites. So starting in verse 5, he appointed only Zoramites as chief captains, as they would have inside information on Nephi's weak spots and would also keep the Lamanites stirred up in anger. So this is a similar strategy that Zarahemnah did.
Right.
So now he marches toward the land of Zarahemla. So what is Moroni doing?
Well, and that's a great question, because again, what Amalickiah has been doing is running simultaneous with what's been happening here. And after Amalickiah had escaped, you had to know that he was going to cause trouble. So Moroni's been preparing.
Yep. He's prepared the minds of the people to be faithful to the Lord.
Now, isn't that interesting?
That's job 1.
The previous verse we were saying that Amalickiah hardened the minds, blinded the minds. That's what it said in verse 3. And that's not what Moroni's doing.
That's a very good point. One might accuse Moroni of using propaganda to further his cause as well with the title of liberty. But look where the direction is. Is it about him? Is it about his glory? Or is it about the Lord?
Yeah.
There's a real difference.
And the people's
in the way
liberty.
Moroni, yes, and their lives, their lands, etc. There's a real patriotism and allegiance to God and country.
Yeah, and they're
It's
not going to
remarkable.
war. They're not aggressing.
Right.
He's not
They're
making them hate
preparing
anybody.
to defend.
Right.
But he is strengthening his armies. He's erecting small forts in places of resorts. He's throwing up banks of earth to enclose his armies. Kind of reminds me of trench warfare from World War I.
Yeah, except that the trenches are the opposite direction.
Right,
Isn't that
exactly.
interesting? The banks of earth, they're actually up.
Well, there's got to be a
put
trench,
them in-
right?
Right.
That dirt's got to come from somewhere.
Exactly. But it's interesting that the trench is in front so that the enemy
Right.
has to go into that trench.
Right. So now they're building walls of stone around all their cities and their borders. Now, this is interesting. So they're establishing sovereignty, not only around their cities, but between the Lamanites' lands and the Nephites' lands. This is our land. That's your land. Okay?
Yeah. Well, and the particular function of that border is to keep people from taking from them.
Right.
protecting wives and children and so forth.
Because the Lamanites will continue to take. If
This is
they're
war.
given an inch, they will take a mile.
Yeah.
So then he goes on to strengthen the weakest fortifications. And so what's interesting about this is now the Zoramites, they had inside information, but now it's out of date.
Yeah, it is.
So he prepares the people to support their liberty, their lands, their wives, their children, their peace, their religion. And here we go. Starting with verse 11. And Moroni was a strong and a mighty man. Now, this is Mormon's tribute to Captain Moroni. He was a man of a perfect understanding, yea, a man that did not delight in bloodshed, a man whose soul did joy in the liberty and the freedom of his country and his brethren from bondage and slavery. Yea, a man whose heart did swell with thanksgiving to his God for the many privileges and blessings which he bestowed upon his people, a man who did labor exceedingly for the welfare and safety of his people. Yea, and he was a man who was firm in the faith of Christ. And he had sworn with an oath to defend his people, his rights, and his country, and his religion, even to the loss of his blood. Skipping to verse 17. Yea, verily I say unto you, if all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of men. Behold, he was a man like unto Ammon, the son of Mosiah. Yea, and even the other sons of Mosiah. Yea, and also Alma and his sons, for they were all men of God. Now behold, Helaman and his brethren were no less serviceable unto the people than was Moroni, for they did preach the word of God, and they did baptize unto repentance all men whosoever would hearken unto their words. Now that is a remarkable tribute. Now, we do not have official information within the Book of Mormon to make this claim, so this is John's opinion. But it seems interesting that Mormon has such high regard for Captain Moroni, and it seems somewhat coincidental that his son's name is Moroni.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I sure hope that's exactly why his son's name is Moroni.
I think there's a good case for that.
What an amazing tribute, not just to one type of work, but the strengthening spiritually, the strengthening and fortifying from a military capacity. I mean, they're building everything up.
Right. You've got Moroni on the military side, but then you've also got Helaman and others on the spiritual side. It's interesting that he uses that phrase, no less serviceable. There was a neat quote that I found in the Institute manual from President Howard W. Hunter. It's an article in the Ensign from April 1992, and the article is called No Less Serviceable. He says, quote, even though Helaman was not as noticeable or conspicuous as Moroni, he was as serviceable. That is, he was as helpful or useful as Moroni. Not all of us are going to be like Moroni, catching the acclaim of our colleagues all day, every day. Most of us will be quiet, relatively unknown folks who come and go and do our work without fanfare. To those of you who may find that lonely or frightening or just unspectacular, I say you are no less serviceable than the most spectacular of your associates. You, too, are part of God's army. Consider, for example, the profound service a mother or father gives in the quiet anonymity of a worthy Latter-day Saint home. Think of the gospel doctrine teachers and primary choristers and scoutmasters and relief society visiting teachers who serve and bless millions, but whose names will never be publicly applauded or featured in the nation's media. Tens of thousands of unseen people make possible our opportunities and happiness every day. As the scriptures state, they are no less serviceable than those whose lives are on the front pages of newspapers. The limelight of history and contemporary attention so often focuses on the one rather than on the many. End quote.
That is so
Such
true.
a great thing to remember.
Well, I'm going to be interested to discuss that idea when we get to chapter 49 and we talk about how these fortifications came to be. So maybe keep that in mind as we go on.
Good point. Going back to verse 21, but as I have said, in the latter end of the 19th year, yea, notwithstanding their peace amongst themselves, they were compelled reluctantly to contend with their brethren, the Lamanites. Yea, and in fine, their wars never did cease for the space of many years with the Lamanites, notwithstanding their much reluctance. So he's establishing here that the Nephites in particular are not the aggressors, but they also don't want to kill the Lamanites because they know that due to the traditions of their fathers, they're not prepared to meet their maker, as it were.
Yeah.
They don't have the gospel.
They don't lust to kill.
Right.
This is not an easy thing to ask people to do.
Right. Verse 23, now they were sorry to take up arms against the Lamanites because they did not delight in the shedding of blood. Yea, and this was not all. They were sorry to be the means of sending so many of their brethren out of this world into an eternal world, unprepared to meet their God. Nevertheless, they could not suffer to lay down their lives, that their wives and their children should be massacred by the barbarous cruelty of those who were once their brethren. Yea, and had dissented from the church, and had left them, and had gone to destroy them by joining the Lamanites. Yea, they could not bear that their brethren should rejoice over the blood of the Nephites so long as there were any who should keep the commandments of God. For the promise of the Lord was, if they should keep his commandments, they should prosper in the land. Quick aside on that. Do we remember this quote, this promise, that if they should keep the commandments, they should prosper in the land? It's over 500 years old. It was given to Lehi. They still remember this, and it's still very much a part of them.
I love it.
So going on to chapter 49,
it begins. Again. We already said it begins, so
that's true.
It's now it begins another time.
Now it's getting real.
Yeah, so take a look at this. Chapter 49, by the way, one of my favorites with regards to not just military, but considering some of the spiritual lessons in it as well. Take a look at how this begins to play out. Again, we're still in the 19th year of the reign of the judges. In verse 1, it came to pass that in the 11th month of the 19th year, on the 10th day of the month, the armies of the Lamanites were seen approaching toward the land of Amalickiah. Now, let's skip ahead to verse 6. Now the leaders of the Lamanites had supposed, because of the greatness of their numbers, yea, they supposed that they should be privileged to come upon them as they had hitherto done. Yea, and they had also prepared themselves with shields and with breastplates, and they had also prepared themselves with garments of skins, yea, very thick garments to cover their nakedness. Now, if you remember the armor of Captain Moroni, they had thick clothing, maybe a thick cotton garment, whereas these guys are using animal skins. So there are some differences, but the similarities, they're trying to overcome the advantages that Captain Moroni had back in chapter 43. They're trying to level the playing field. So if they can do that and they have the numbers, they should be fine. Verse 7, and being thus prepared, they supposed that they should easily overpower and subject their brethren to the yoke of bondage, or slay and massacre them according to their pleasure. You know, we just read in the last chapter how the Nephites took no pleasure in having to go to war against the Lamanites. But they use this phrase here, that they could slay or massacre according to their pleasure. That's a really sad phrase.
It shows a real difference between the two sides.
Yeah. But behold, to their uttermost astonishment, they were prepared for them in a manner which never had been known among the children of Lehi. Now they were prepared for the Lamanites to battle after the manner of the instructions of Moroni. And it came to pass that the Lamanites, or the Amalickiahites, and it's interesting that he gives that clarification. He almost doesn't want to put this on the Lamanites. They're being led by Amalickiah. Were exceedingly astonished at their manner of preparation for war. So why were they so astonished? I wanted to jump ahead to these verses because I want to set the stage. So let's go back now to verse 2 and see, why didn't just wearing the armor fix the problem? Well, verse 2, and behold, the city had been rebuilt. Remember, they're coming to Amalickiah because it had been wiped out, so they consider it weak. but it had been rebuilt, and Moroni had stationed an army by the borders of the city, and they had cast up dirt round about to shield them from the arrows and stones of the Lamanites. For behold, they fought with stones and with arrows. Behold, I said that the city of Amalickiah had been rebuilt. I say unto you, yea, that it was in part rebuilt. And because the Lamanites had destroyed it once, because of the iniquity of the people, they supposed that it would again become an easy prey for them. But behold, how great was their disappointment. For behold, the Nephites had dug up a ridge of earth round about them, which was so high that the Lamanites could not cast their stones and their arrows at them that they might take effect. Neither could they come upon them, save it was by their place of entrance. Now at this time the chief captains of the Lamanites were astonished exceedingly because of the wisdom of the Nephites in preparing their places of security. So what does it take to fortify a city like this, to shock your enemies at your preparations? I would propose it happens one shovelful at a time. Let's take a look at this graphic. Here we've got this pile of earth, which is exceedingly high. Now, the height, what they're talking about is the height of the ridge of earth so that the arrows and stones and stuff don't take effect. Remember that it's not just the ridge of earth, but there's also a trench as a result. And so you're not just talking about height, but you're talking about height and distance. Look at the trench you'd have to dig. Look at the pile you'd have to dig. Can you get a sense of how overwhelming that would feel to dig that hole by yourself? So the question that I think would be interesting to discuss with your friends and family is, what does it take to do that? I've made a list here, although it would be fun for you to ask this question and see what other ones people could come up with. But look at this. We need people to dig. We need lots of people to dig. And I didn't put it on here, but we also need time. The time to build these fortifications is not when the enemy's at your doorstep. We need people to make tools. We need people to fix the tools. We need people to make clothing, to fix the clothing. We need people who have medical skills, people to make food, to bring water. Thank heavens for those who bring water. People to design the fortifications, to lead the various labors, all the different labors, including food preparation. We need people to keep watch and to make weapons and to gather resources, care for children, to offer spiritual support and inspiration, to care for flocks. There's so many different parts to this. Remember what President Hunter was saying. All of these people are of no less service than those that are in the trenches digging these fortifications. We need everybody, and it gets done one shovelful at a time. So when you're thinking about even fortifying yourself against your spiritual enemies, it takes more than just you. There's lots of people contributing to your strengthening, your fortifications. And understand that it takes time. One shovelful at a time. But once it's built, what a blessing. It caused awe in the enemies who came to destroy them.
Yep. As a matter of fact, they came to attack Amalickiah, assuming that it would be an easy prey, and they saw the fortifications and changed their minds. As the verses tell us, if Amalickiah himself would have been commanding the forces rather than sitting at home and waiting for others to do it for him, remember that's his MO usually, he probably would have attempted an attack because he didn't care about the blood of his men, but he wasn't there. So the forces retreat to the land of Noah, thinking this would be the next best place to attack first. So the captains rile up their forces, and they swear with an oath to destroy the city of Noah.
They must have been very confident.
They were. And when they got there, they discovered that Noah had been fortified even more than Amalickiah. It would seem that Moroni assumed that they would head to Noah after seeing what they had done in Amalickiah, so he made that even stronger. So now we got a problem.
This is just going to be horrible. But again, look at the fact that they made the oath and watch how that plays out.
Right. And this kind of goes into their whole allegiance to swearing an oath.
Yeah.
You know, that means a very important thing
a big
to them.
deal.
So let's talk about the Battle of Noah.
All right, verse 16. And behold, Moroni had appointed Lehi. Oh, no. Oh, no. To be chief captain over the men of that city. So imagine these guys thinking they're going to be able to take out the next weak link, which is Noah. It's even more fortified. And then they find out that Lehi is in charge. And it was that same Lehi who fought with the Lamanites in the valley on the east of the river Sidon. Remember that story in Alma 43. And now behold, it came to pass that when the Lamanites had found that Lehi commanded the city, they were again disappointed, for they feared Lehi exceedingly.
You know, I don't know what happened in that battle, but they are scared to death of him.
Yeah. Well, there's one possible reason, and watch for this coming up. He's the spring in Captain Moroni's traps. So if they didn't think it was bad enough already, the fact that Lehi's there seems to already give them the notion that Captain Moroni was expecting them, and things are going to be a lot worse than they could possibly imagine. All right. Nevertheless, their chief captains had sworn with an oath to attack the city. Therefore, they brought up their armies. This might be a good lesson to be careful who you swear an oath to, how you swear an oath. Verse 18, Now behold, the Lamanites could not get into their forts of security by any other way, save by the entrance, because of the highness of the bank which had been thrown up, and the depth of the ditch which had been dug round about, save it were by the entrance. Remember, that ditch almost doubles the size of that bank of earth.
For however high the bank of earth is, it's also equally low in the opposite direction.
Yeah, so if you want to go down into it, you've got to climb double that distance, as opposed to when the ground was level. Thus were the Nephites prepared to destroy all such as should attempt to climb up, to enter the fort by any other way by casting over stones and arrows at them. They've got gravity on their side when it comes to casting stones and arrows. Thus they were prepared, yea, a body of their strongest men, with their swords and their slings, to smite down all who should attempt to come into their place of security by the place of entrance. And thus were they prepared to defend themselves against the Lamanites. Look at that phrase at the beginning of 20, a body of their strongest men. That means that there were weaker men and men that were less serviceable at the entrance. That doesn't mean they can't be of service elsewhere. Remember our list of what it takes to build that fortification. The same applies to what it takes to keep that fortification, to defend it. So you've got people that are their strongest men, their best warriors, they're going to put at the weakest place. But there's places all around the fortifications where people can serve, and to support those people that are on the walls, that are in the entrance. So everybody needs to work together. Verse 21, It came to pass that the captains of the Lamanites brought up their armies before the place of entrance, and began to contend with the Nephites, to get into their place of security. But behold, they were driven back from time to time, insomuch that they were slain with an immense slaughter. Now, when they found that they could not obtain power over the Nephites by the pass, they began to dig down their banks of earth, that they might obtain a pass to their armies, that they might have an equal chance to fight. But behold, in these attempts they were swept off by the stones and arrows which were thrown at them. And instead of filling up their ditches by pulling down the banks of earth, they were filled up in a measure with their dead and wounded bodies. Thus the Nephites had all power over their enemies. And thus the Lamanites did attempt to destroy the Nephites until their chief captains were all slain. Yea, and more than 1,000 of the Lamanites were slain, while on the other hand there was not a single soul of the Nephites which was slain.
That's really impressive.
That's what Captain Moroni does.
Yep. Now, Mormon goes on in the next few verses to mention that about 50 of the Nephites were wounded, mostly on their legs.
And that was one area where, when we see the list of the armor, they don't have armor on their legs. It seems that they would rather trade off mobility than to cover up the legs.
But it would seem like Moroni to perhaps look into what he might be able to do for his men on the tower, to protect their legs.
Yeah, I think the idea of those getting wounded on the legs, those are the guys in the entrance, and there was just part of the risk of it, which is sad.
So after seeing that all their chief captains were slain, the Lamanites retreated into the wilderness, They return to Nephi to report the loss to Amalickiah. Amalickiah is furious. He curses God and swears with an oath to drink the blood of Moroni. Now, we just talked about the dangers of making certain oaths.
Oh, don't do that.
Here's one that I think won't turn out that well either.
Yeah.
The Nephites are thankful and praise God for his protection. And now we come to the end of the 19th year of the reign of the judges.
Oh, my goodness. What a year.
Yeah. Now the chapter ends, verse 30, yea, and there was continual peace among them and exceedingly great prosperity in the church because of their heed and diligence which they gave unto the word of God, which was declared unto them by Helaman and Shiblon and Corianton, and Ammon and his brethren, yea, and by all those who had been ordained by the holy order of God, being baptized unto repentance and sent forth to preach among the people. So the work of God moves forward. Evidently, Amalickiah's damage was recoverable.
Well, and it's interesting that as the work of God goes forward among the Nephites, Amalickiah is cursing God.
Yep.
We'll see where that takes him. So let's take a look at this chart one more time before we leave the 19th year of the reign of the judges, just as a reminder. Take a look at everything that happened in chapter 45, 46, 47, 48, and we just got done with 49. What a year. Wow.
Agreed. So chapter 50, welcome to chapter 50. You have made it quite a ways into the lesson, thank you. Now we're in the 20th year of the reign of the judges. What does Moroni do? Sit on his laurels? No. He continues fortifications, heaps of earth dug around all the cities, timbers to the height of a man placed atop the heaps. Protective guard towers are built in addition to the timbers.
Yeah, so he's taking what he's done and just expanding it.
Yeah, improving on it.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable.
So for those Lamanites who are trying to tear down the heaps of earth, we'll put these strong timbers on top of that so they can't get through even if they did.
Yeah, there seems to be the breastwork of timbers appears to be almost a foundation platform on which to put their vertical timbers, and then these guard towers to overlook those. It would be horrible to go up against that.
Agreed. So Moroni takes his armies into the east wilderness. Now, why is he doing this? This is the east wilderness on the Zarahemla side. This is where some Lamanites had set up strongholds. So he brings his armies in there and drives all the Lamanites that are in there out to the land of Nephi. It's interesting that it mentions that he drives them out. He doesn't slaughter them.
Right.
He just forces them to leave.
Yep.
Now he causes the Nephites from Zarahemla to settle in the east wilderness to perhaps discourage the Lamanite return.
Yeah.
Okay, this is our land. We've settled it. That's your land. This is our land.
Yeah.
He places armies and fortifications on the southern border of their land between Nephi and Zarahemla, establishing sovereignty. Once again, your land, our land. The Nephites establish a city near the border called Moroni. And they also start building a city between Moroni and Aaron called Nephihah. That'll come into play a little later.
Well, and that's the chief judge at the time.
Right. They built many cities further north, one in particular called Lehi, which I really hope is after Captain Lehi.
I hope so, too.
He deserves it.
Yeah,
He
so
seems like
a
an
lot
awesome
of these
guy.
modern cities then that they're building up now are being named after modern...
Important men of the day.
Yeah.
So this ends the 20th year of the reign of the judges. So we didn't have any battles in the 20th year of the reign of the judges. Yay for our team.
Yay.
And what did they do during that year? They built themselves up. They strengthened their fortifications. They established their sovereignty. Good things.
Mm-hmm.
So now peace is established for 3 years. And here's Mormon's summary. Verse 17, and in these prosperous circumstances were the people of Nephi in the commencement of the 21st year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. And they did prosper exceedingly, and they became exceedingly rich. Yea, and they did multiply and wax strong in the land. And thus we see how merciful and just are all the dealings of the Lord to the fulfilling of all his words unto the children of men. Yea, we can behold that his words are verified, even at this time. which he spake unto Lehi, saying, Blessed art thou and thy children, and they shall be blessed, inasmuch as they shall keep my commandments, they shall prosper in the land. But remember, inasmuch as they will not keep my commandments, they shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord. And we see that these promises have been verified to the people of Nephi, for it has been their quarrelings and their contentions, yea, their murderings and their plunderings, their idolatry, their whoredoms, and their abominations, which were among themselves, which brought upon them their wars and their destructions.
Wow.
And those who were faithful in keeping the commandments of the Lord were delivered at all times, whilst thousands of their wicked brethren have been consigned to bondage, or to perish by the sword, or to dwindle in unbelief, and mingle with the Lamanites. But behold, there never was a happier time among the people of Nephi since the days of Nephi than in the days of Moroni. Yea, even at this time, in the 21st year of the reign of the judges. And it came to pass that the 22nd year of the reign of the judges also ended in peace. Yea, and also the 23rd year. Wow.
It's awfully nice to get something like this after all of this war and battling, and what a great observation, but so important to remember that this wickedness and this righteousness, the quarreling, the contentions, are all happening among the people of God. And there's a reason we need to watch for that. That's when problems happen, not when outside influences necessarily attack us. That doesn't seem to be the big problem for the Book of Mormon people. It's the infighting that's the problem.
Yep.
Well, let's see what happens going forward. Verse 25, And it came to pass that in the commencement of the 24th year of the reign of the judges, there would also have been peace among the people of Nephi, had it not been for a contention which took place among them concerning the land of Lehi and the land of Morianton, which joined upon the borders of Lehi, both of which were on the borders by the seashore. Now, this sounds like a local issue, and yet Mormon's introducing it to us as if there were national consequences to it. So let's pay attention to what happens. For behold, the people who possessed the land of Morianton did claim a part of the land of Lehi. Therefore there began to be a warm contention between them, insomuch that the people of Morianton took up arms against their brethren, and they were determined by the sword to slay them. What?
Wow. That must have been some pretty awesome land, I'm just saying.
Over a border dispute? Now, remember, we're still in the East Wilderness here. These are these new places, and apparently many people are doing a great job in building their cities.
Well, and be careful. Technically, you could call the whole Lamanite-Nephite contention a border dispute, but
Yeah,
it's
well,
a little more than
we were
that.
hoping not to have that among the Nephites,
Right.
but here we are. Verse 27, But behold, the people who possessed the land of Lehi fled to the camp of Moroni, and appealed unto him for assistance, for behold, they were not in the wrong. So you got this guy Morianton, who says, that's our land. The people of Lehi said, no, it's not. This is our land. Oh, really? I say it's my land, and I'm going to get our weapons, and we're going to come in. So they run to the military commander, who's probably still in Jershon, and ask for assistance. Well, it came to pass in verse 28 that when the people of Morianton, who were led by a man whose name was Morianton, found that the people of Lehi had fled to the camp of Moroni, they were exceedingly fearful lest the army of Moroni should come upon them and destroy them. They didn't think about that beforehand? How did they think this was going to work out?
They don't seem like the kind of people to really think things through.
Now, that may have to do with their leader.
Maybe.
Therefore Morianton put it into their hearts that they should flee to the land which was northward, which was covered with large bodies of water, and take possession of the land which was northward. And behold, they would have carried this plan into effect, which would have been a cause to have been lamented. But behold, Morianton, being a man of much passion, therefore he was angry with one of his maidservants, and he fell upon her, and beat her much. Let's try to understand what's happening here. Understand that the events that Mormon is telling us are so important as to be in the record of the kings, and that there would have been a major strategical problem for what would have happened if it was able to be carried through. The land northward, remember, that is accessed by a little area in the narrow neck, a small area called the Narrow Pass. And this narrow pass is one of the most important strategic places. Almost every enemy of the Nephites tries to get there, which is why Bountiful is protected and so fortified on that border. Because if someone can get to the land northward, then all they have to do to protect their border is protect that little space, that narrow pass. And then they would end up with enemies on the north and enemies on the south. And that would have been a serious problem. Now, there's another phrase here at the end of 30 when it says that Morianton fell upon his maidservant and beat her much. I used to read over that and just thought, oh, he beat up his maidservant, which is already not great. But that expression, he fell upon her, if you look how that is used in the Book of Mormon, to fall upon, I did a word search or phrase search about to fall upon. As far as I could tell, almost every reference is about destruction and death. There's a curse falling upon him, buildings falling upon them, but usually there's things like in Alma 19:22, he drew his sword that he might let it fall upon Ammon to slay him. The Lamanites began to fall upon them, began to slay them. Time and time again, to fall upon someone is to kill them. So this isn't just a domestic problem.
He didn't just get drunk one night and...
Yeah, this is really, he fell upon her and beat her much. This is something that is probably incredibly debilitating. So what I want to do before we go too far on in this story is try to paint a picture of this situation. Here we've got a guy who says he's a man of much passion. So this probably isn't the first time that he's treated his people badly or his servants, especially considering how he dishonestly was willing to slay his own countrymen just over a piece of land. He's that kind of a guy.
It would also imply that he's a little impulsive.
Right. So in verse 31, it says, it came to pass that she fled. Now, obviously, there's a bigger story to what's going on here. Let me offer a couple of thoughts. One, there's obviously a caste system here. He's the master, she's the servant. And he's a man of a lot of prestige and power, apparently, to lead these people. When he's fallen upon her and beat her much, what kind of condition is she in to take a trip? And if she has to leave the house quickly, what does she think is going to happen? Put yourself in her situation. You've just been absolutely abused. You decide that you need to take this news, which has got national importance, and take it to the only person in the area who can do anything about it. Can you take the regular roads? Like, if you were going to just get on the main road to, say, Jershon, wouldn't you suppose that Morianton at any moment, when he finds out you're gone with that information, that he would send people after you? That you're looking over your shoulder constantly? So I'm imagining somebody who is in rough shape, who maybe hasn't prepared for this journey anyway. Does she have the right shoes for it? And yet she probably can't take the main road. She probably needs to get into the wilderness area and is constantly thinking at any moment that somebody's going to pop out from Morianton's household and end her. So with this horror, she's driving forward with this goal in mind. And something else I wonder, and this is me really imagining here, but we know that the title of liberty was posted throughout all the land. Had she seen the title of liberty? Had she recognized the lack of liberty in her situation and maybe what that would mean if Morianton became as powerful as he wanted to become? We talk about the different ways we each can serve. What she did in traveling to Captain Moroni, the bravery it took, the drive that it took, the kind of fortitude, and then inspired by that title of liberty, it's certainly possible. So she gets there. Again, back to verse 31. She came over to the camp of Moroni and told Moroni all things concerning the matter, and also concerning their intentions to flee into the land northward. They wouldn't have known without her, and this was significant. Again, the thing that she does here is entered into the book of the Kings. Now, I say the book of the Kings. I know we don't have kings at the time. It's the book of the people of Nephi. And behold, the people who were in the land bountiful, or rather Moroni, feared that they would hearken to the words of Morianton and unite with his people. And thus he would obtain possession of those parts of the land, which would lay a foundation for serious consequences among the people of Nephi, yea, which consequences would lead to the overthrow of their liberty. Therefore Moroni sent an army with their camp to head the people of Morianton, to stop their flight into the land northward. And it came to pass that they did not head them until they had come to the borders of the land desolation, and there they did head them, by the narrow pass which led by the sea into the land northward, yea, by the sea on the west and on the east. And it came to pass that the army which was sent by Moroni, which was led by a man whose name was Teancum. Okay, so now we've unleashed Teancum. If you're Morianton, this is horrible news. A man whose name was Teancum did meet the people of Morianton, and so stubborn were the people of Morianton, being inspired by his wickedness and his flattering words, that a battle commenced between them, in the which Teancum did slay Morianton, and defeat his army, and took them prisoners, and returned to the camp of Moroni, and thus ended the 24th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, and thus were the people of Morianton brought back. And upon their covenanting to keep the peace, they were restored to the land of Morianton, and a union took place between them and the people of Lehi, and they were also restored to their lands.
And I have to assume that the border issue was resolved at that point.
Well, it's nice, that phrase, that a union took place between. So they were at odds, and again, it was Morianton's fault. After Morianton's gone and they've covenanted to be better people, they're brought back into the fold, as it were, and a union between those that they had wronged and threatened. There's a union between them.
That is a good thing. So the last few verses of chapter 50, we have in the same year, the 24th year of the reign of the judges, Nephihah dies, and Nephihah's son, Pahoran, reigns in his stead as chief judge. In verse 38, we see that Alma attempted to bestow the plates and sacred items to Nephihah. This is at a previous time, long ago, but Nephihah declined, so he bestowed them to his son Helaman. So now we're at the end of the 24th year of the reign of the judges, the 25th year of the reign of the judges. This is roughly 68 BC. In the old world, Rome is starting to become a force to be reckoned with, and 5 years later will conquer Jerusalem. So let's go on to chapter 51. And if you are sitting through one session listening to us, my hat is off to you. This has been a long journey, but thank you.
Yeah. Woo, let's keep going.
And the first few verses, the 25th year of the reign of the judges, starts peacefully. But there becomes a grassroots political group that is forming. They want to change the laws of the land to allow for a king rather than a chief judge. These are referred to as kingmen, and these are mainly power-hungry individuals of high birth.
Yeah, you'll start to notice this whenever there's a switch in the ruling power. We had problems when we went from King Mosiah to the chief judge system and with Alma. And, as these chief judgeships change, there's this kind of political instability, and that's when you get these uprisings.
So Pahoran ignores their petitions, the petitions of the kingmen, and the kingmen call for the dethronement of Pahoran, and two political factions form, the kingmen and the freemen. The people hold an election, and the freemen win. So that's the end of that, right?
Which is fascinating, because if the kingmen were in power, you would never have an election. You'd never get to put in the voice of the people.
And I'm certain that the kingmen did not think that one through either. They often don't.
Yeah.
So verse 9, but behold, this was a critical time for such contentions to be among the people of Nephi. For behold, Amalickiah had again stirred up the hearts of the people of the Lamanites against the people of the Nephites, and he was gathering together soldiers from all parts of his land, and arming them, and preparing for war with all diligence, for he had sworn to drink the blood of Moroni. But behold, we shall see, there's those words again, that this promise which he made was rash. Nevertheless, he did prepare himself and his armies to come to battle against the Nephites. Now, his armies were not so great as they had hitherto been, because of the many thousands who had been slain by the hands of the Nephites. But notwithstanding their great loss, Amalickiah had gathered together a wonderfully great army, insomuch that he feared not to come down to the land of Zarahemla. Yea, even Amalickiah did himself come down at the head of the Lamanites, and it was in the 25th year of the reign of the judges, and it was the same time that they had begun to settle the affairs of their contentions concerning the chief judge, Behoren. Okay, so this is just after the election. So the kingmen hear that Amalickiah is coming, and they're excited. They're glad, because they are going to refuse to take up arms. These guys are sore losers.
This is treason.
It is treason. They're refusing to defend their country. Moroni, being very angry due to the stubbornness of the kingmen, gains, by voice of the people, permission to compel the kingmen to defend their country. Kind of reminds me of a draft. Your name's come up, you got to defend. Moroni takes his armies and rounds up the kingmen. Any kingmen who did lift their weapons of war to fight against the men of Moroni, they were hewn down and leveled to the earth.
Wow.
Moroni was not one to be trifled with.
Well, think of what's on the line, though. It's not like we're just talking about something frivolous. Their enemy is at the doorstep.
It's time for war, and they need to manifest where their allegiances lie. And if they lie within themselves, as 4,000 of these men did, they're going to die. 4,000 kingmen died, and their leaders who survived were put into prison for a trial later. It's time for war. It's not time for a free trial, so we'll have that later.
Yeah, and you know what's remarkable, too, is the more people you have defending, the less people you're likely to lose. It's by putting fewer soldiers out there that you end up losing more and more. This is not just hurting them or even the country. I mean, there's real costs to their behavior.
Right, absolutely. Verse 21, and thus Moroni put an end to those kingmen, that there were not any known by the appellation of kingmen, and thus he put an end to the stubbornness and the pride of those people who professed the blood of nobility. But they were brought down to humble themselves like unto their brethren, and to fight valiantly for their freedom from bondage. Now, here's another aside to think about. I don't know what these kingmen are thinking as far as, there's an enemy coming to invade us. Oh, we're not going to help. We're just going to sit back and watch this happen. If the Lamanites defeat the Nephites, are they just assuming that they will be lesser slaves because they will not have, they won't be abused as much as slaves because they didn't resist?
It doesn't sound like it's going to work out well.
No, it isn't. And that's the thing that manifests to me that they're not thinking this through. They're still not going to get their design. If they want to sit back and say, well, this is not my government, well, okay, but you're in this land, so it kind of is. And you're going to need to either defend it or that is treason, especially at a time of war.
Yeah. Well, you could say that maybe they're hoping because Amalickiah is leading the Lamanites, maybe they're hoping to get in on that, but I don't know.
That's possible. But boy, that's a pretty big risk.
It is a big risk, especially considering that he doesn't have anything to gain by helping these guys out. He's already king. He's got it all. So
Yep. So one of the things that's interesting about these stories is that we see a real reverence within the church for the government institution, that we consider this a God-given institution. There's a quote that I found in the Institute manual from then Elder Russell M. Nelson. This is from October 2002 General Conference. He says, quote, "Men really are brothers because God really is our Father. Nevertheless, scriptures are studded with stories of contention and combat. They strongly condemn wars of aggression, but sustain obligations of citizens to defend their families and their freedoms. Members of this church will be called into military service of many nations. We believe that governments were instituted of God for the benefit of man, and that he holds men accountable for their acts in relation to them. both in making laws and administering them for the good and safety of society. During the Second World War, when members of the church were forced to fight on opposing sides, the First Presidency affirmed that the state is responsible for the civil control of its citizens or subjects, for their political welfare, and for the carrying forward of political policies, domestic and foreign. But the church itself, as such, has no responsibility for these policies, other than urging its members fully to render loyalty to their country." End quote. That's really an interesting thing to think about. I think we lose sight of that sometimes, having been so far detached from World War II. Most people today would consider the Allied forces in World War II to be, quote, the good guys, and the Axis forces to be the bad guys. But consider that there were members of the church who were members of all of these nations. Yeah. And the church never came out and said, hey, you church members in Germany, don't fight or resist your government. The government is a God-given institution, just like that of the family. The church is also very protective of the family as well, and for good reason. So going on, starting in verse 22, the Lamanites start to come into the land of Moroni during the Kingmen civil skirmish. The Lamanites take the city of Moroni and all its fortifications.
Oh,
now,
man.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. The Nephites retreat out of Moroni to join Lehi's troops in Nephihah. Amalickiah ends up taking over Nephihah, Lehi, Morianton, Omner, Gid, and Mulek. These are all eastern border cities.
And they're also all fortified. These are all fortified cities. Now, you remember we just went through the whole thing in Alma 49 with the city of Noah. Things have been fortified even better since then. It was a bloodbath for the Lamanites to go up against there. Now the Nephites have got to try to take those back. Remember that they said in 49 that if Amalickiah had been there, he would have, ordered, because he didn't care about his people. So that's apparently
true. You got to wonder
true.
how small his army is now. How many people fell just to take over those cities. But he doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
He just wants
But now
control.
Moroni, who loves his people, how are they going to take those back?
And so now, arrogantly, Amalickiah marches his troops to Bountiful. Now, I'm assuming here that the notion is he's trying to get to the north of the land of Zarahemla so that he can surround them now.
That was the danger with Morianton. And Amalickiah is not going to be the last one.
Nope. Now, he is met by Teancum and his men. Remember Teancum? Yeah, he's a bad boy. You don't want to mess with him. Quote, "Every man of Teancum did exceed the Lamanites in their strength and in their skill of war." So, yeah, that didn't go over well. Amalickiah is repulsed.
Remarkable. Okay, let's take just a moment here to review. We've had all this great peace. We had this little incident with Morianton. But all this peace, and now we have a change in the ruler. We have the Kingmen uprising. And while all of that political mess is going on, Amalickiah is able to take city after city after city along the East Coast all the way up to Bountiful. And they're losing these fortified cities. I would like you to consider a question. Do you remember we were talking before in 47 about the guards of the king that Amalickiah had framed for the murder of the king, and how these guys, Laman was one of them, had to flee and join the people of Ammon? Well, Laman, he's got a particular set of skills that make him a nightmare to people like Amalickiah. At some point, he joins Captain Moroni's army, but we don't know when. But I wonder, he's been living with the people of Ammon now for about 5.5 years, up until these events are happening, a little more than 5 years. Amalickiah is the guy that destroyed his life, dishonored him, took over his former people, and now he's conquering his new people, the Nephites? There was nothing he could do to stop Amalickiah before, but now, well, he's got that particular set of skills. And I think if there was any time that we could imagine that he would have joined Captain Moroni's army, I think perhaps right now is that time. Again, he'll pop up in chapter 55, but this might be the time when he joined up.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I think so. Let's take a look in these next verses, 32. It came to pass that they did harass them, insomuch that they did slay them. Now this is Teancum's army against Amalickiah's army, even until it was dark. And it came to pass that Teancum and his men did pitch their tents in the borders of the land bountiful, and Amalickiah did pitch his tents in the border on the beach by the seashore. And after this manner were they driven. And it came to pass that when the night had come, Teancum and his servant stole forth, and went out by night, and went into the camp of Amalickiah. And behold, sleep had overpowered them because of their much fatigue, which was caused by the labors and the heat of the day. And it came to pass that Teancum stole privily into the tent of the king, and put a javelin to his heart. And he did cause the death of the king immediately, that he did not awaken his servants. And he returned again privily to his own camp. And behold, his men were asleep, and he awoke them, and told them all the things that he had done. And he caused that his armies should stand in readiness, lest the Lamanites had awakened and should come upon them. And thus ended the 25th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. And thus ended the days of Amalickiah. Oh my gosh.
So there we go. While he had laid out 8 simple steps for world domination, he couldn't quite get that last one.
No, and here's the thing that amazes me about Teancum. He's been fighting all day too. He should be as exhausted as everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But he does what the army can't do. He and his servant sneak in and eliminate the king, because by doing that, think about how many lives they saved.
Well, and he probably had some semblance of understanding that the reason why his troops were so riled up was because of him. And that if we could stop the propaganda and the riling and so on and so forth, that we might be able to actually talk sense.
Well, and there's one more thing that he might have understood that scholars have talked about the possibility of. The night he did this, it was what we would call New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And there's power in many ancient cultures about the event that happens on the first day of the new year. And that idea brings us into chapter 52.
And welcome to chapter 52. You have an amazing amount of endurance. Well done. Verse 1. And now it came to pass in the 26th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, behold, when the Lamanites awoke on the first morning of the first month, so Happy New Year, behold, they found Amalickiah was dead in his own tent.
That is not a good omen.
No, it is not. And they also saw that Teancum was ready to give them battle on that day. When the Lamanites saw this, they were affrighted. And they abandoned their design in marching into the land northward, and retreated with all their army into the city of Mulek, and sought protection in their fortifications. So they chickened out. They went back to the fortified
I would have.
cities.
Holy cow.
Oh, yeah.
Teancum's a beast.
He is. And it came to pass that the brother of Amalickiah was appointed king over the people, and his name was Amaron. Thus Amaron, the brother of King Amalickiah, was appointed to reign in his stead. And it came to pass that he did command that his people should maintain those cities which they had taken by the shedding of blood, for they had not taken any cities, save they had lost much blood.
Yeah. And again, we know that.
So the plan is, we're not going to be aggressive anymore, or at least not for now. We're just going to maintain what we've got. It's taken a little more of a conservative approach than his brother, who is dead.
Yeah,
so,
look where that got him.
So maybe he's not so dumb.
Yeah.
Going on, Teancum sees that the Lamanites are determined to maintain the cities they've gained rather than attack further at this point. And Teancum decides not to attempt to attack them in their strongholds, but
no way.
He prepared to defend until Moroni sends more men. Okay, so now where is Moroni? That would be the interesting question. Moroni commands Teancum to retain all of his prisoners in hopes to exchange Nephite prisoners that had been taken by the Lamanites. Moroni orders to fortify Bountiful, but also the narrow passageway that would allow the Lamanites to travel further north. Again, we got to hold that.
Yeah.
So now Moroni would come to help Teancum, but he is busy with another Lamanite invasion attempt that's on the west border.
Yeah.
So that seems to have been a little coordinated.
A little.
Just saying.
Yeah, and keep in mind that that was happening while the East Coast thing was going on. There was an attack in the West. We haven't talked about it yet. But
No.
Moroni will go and try to deal with things there. But the battles on both sides are going to be a focus next lesson.
Yep. So going on, Ammoron leaves the battles near Bountiful to inform the queen of Amalickiah's death, but also to gather a large force to attack on the West Sea border. You know, we're doing a little divide and conquer thing. This goes on all year to the end of the 26th year of the reign of the judges. In the 27th year, Moroni establishes the west border and leads an army to help Teancum. So he does resolve that conflict.
Yeah.
It took some time. He orders Teancum to wage an attack on Mulek and attempt to reclaim it. Teancum makes an attempt, but it's too difficult with the fortifications in place, so they retreat back to Bountiful. Moroni and his troops arrive toward the end of the year. So this was something that he tried in the 27th year, but he wasn't able to do it. But he's still waiting for Moroni to come. Moroni finally comes towards the end of the year, and in the 28th year of the reign of the judges, Moroni and Teancum hold a council of war to figure out how to lead out the Lamanites. Moroni asks Jacob, a Zoramite and leader of the Lamanite forces in Mulek, to come out and meet them on the plain to battle. Jacob refuses.
Jacob is smart.
Yes, he is. So let's get back into the scriptures.
All right, verse 21. And it came to pass that Moroni, having no hopes of meeting them upon fair grounds, therefore he resolved upon a plan, that he might decoy the Lamanites out of their strongholds. Therefore he caused that Teancum should take a small number of men, and march near the seashore. And Moroni and his army by night marched in the wilderness on the west of the city Mulek. And thus, on the morrow, when the guards of the Lamanites had discovered Teancum, they ran and told it unto Jacob, their leader. And it came to pass that the armies of the Lamanites did march forth against Teancum, supposing by their numbers to overpower Teancum, because of the smallness of his numbers. And as Teancum saw the armies of the Lamanites coming out against him, he began to retreat down by the seashore northward. Now, here's another great example. Down by the seashore, of course, we're talking elevation. You, of course, go down by the seashore, but then he's headed northward. And what's northward? Well, Bountiful is northward.
And the narrow pass.
Yes. Well, but Teancum's looking at Bountiful. And it came to pass that when the Lamanites saw that he began to flee, they took courage and pursued him with vigor. And while Teancum was thus leading away the armies who were pursuing them in vain, behold, Moroni commanded that a part of his army, who were with him, should march forth into the city and take possession of it. And thus they did, and slew all those who had been left to protect the city, yea, all those who would not yield up their weapons of war. That's an interesting distinction there, too. And thus Moroni had obtained possession of the city Mulek with a part of his army, while he marched with the remainder to meet the Lamanites when they should return from their pursuit of Teancum. Obviously, he knows Teancum's going to get away. And it came to pass that the Lamanites did pursue Teancum until they came near the city Bountiful, and then they were met by Lehi. Oh,
Dun, dun,
no.
dun.
I'm telling you, you don't want to meet Captain Lehi if you're an enemy. And a small army which had been left to protect the city Bountiful. And now, behold, when the chief captains of the Lamanites had beheld Lehi with his army coming against them, they fled in much confusion. Why? It's only a small army, but it's led by Lehi. Lest perhaps they should not obtain the city Mulek before Lehi should overtake them, for they were wearied because of their march, and the men of Lehi were fresh. See, he always is the spring to the trap.
Yep.
And remember, the Lamanites feared Lehi exceedingly. Remember chapter 49.
I gotta wonder if Lehi has like a unique symbol on a pennant or something, so that even from a distance they can tell there he is.
Oh, no. Yeah, I wondered that too. I've actually thought
It's just
of...
being considered as like a bad omen. When
Yeah.
you see the emblem of Lehi, all hope is lost.
Well, and that's just it. Captain Moroni's plan is working when he shows up.
That's true.
Then all of a sudden you've got to be like, oh no, something really bad is happening.
We were duped. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, verse 29, now the Lamanites did not know that Moroni had been in their rear with his army, and all they feared was Lehi and his men. Now Lehi was not desirous to overtake them till they should meet Moroni and his army. It's like they're just sauntering,
Mm-hmm.
And it came to pass that before the Lamanites had retreated far, they were surrounded by the Nephites, by the men of Moroni on one hand, and the men of Lehi on the other, all of whom were fresh and full of strength. But the Lamanites were wearied because of their long march. Now, remember, if Amalickiah had been there, he would have really spurred them on, but he's dead, and his brother Ammoron is back in the homeland, in the land of Nephi. But they do have somebody who's going to fire them up. Verse 32, and Moroni commanded his men that they should fall upon them until they had given up their weapons of war. And it came to pass that Jacob, being their leader, being also a Zoramite, he's a dissenter again, leading them, and having an unconquerable spirit, he led the Lamanites forth to battle with exceeding fury against Moroni. Moroni being in their course of march, therefore Jacob was determined to slay them and cut his way through to the city of Mulek. But behold, Moroni and his men were more powerful. Therefore they did not give way before the Lamanites.
And the sad truth is, even if he did cut his way through, guess what he would have met at Mulek?
Another army of Moroni. So it would have been terrible either way.
Yep.
Verse 35, and it came to pass that they fought on both hands with exceeding fury, and there were many slain on both sides. Yea, and Moroni was wounded, and Jacob was killed. And Lehi pressed upon their rear with such fury, with his strong men, of course Lehi's strong men, and the Lamanites in the rear delivered up their weapons of war. And the remainder of them, being much confused, knew not whether to go or to strike. So are you picturing this? We've got Jacob, who's in the front of the retreat. He's headed toward Mulek. He's going up against Captain Moroni. Captain Moroni even gets wounded. That's how hard they're fighting. Meanwhile, in the back, we've got Captain Lehi. He's fighting so hard that everybody in the back just gives up. They surrender. And so you've got the guys in the middle who are like, I don't know what we should do. Now Moroni, seeing their confusion, he said unto them, if ye will bring forth your weapons of war and deliver them up, behold, we will forbear shedding your blood. And it came to pass that when the Lamanites had heard these words, their chief captains, all those who were not slain, came forth and threw down their weapons of war at the feet of Moroni, and also commanded their men that they should do the same. But behold, there were many that would not. And those who would not deliver up their swords were taken and bound, and their weapons of war were taken from them. And they were compelled to march with their brethren forth into the land of Bountiful. And now the number of prisoners who were taken exceeded more than the number of those who had been slain, yea, more than those who had been slain on both sides. So here again we have a very merciful Captain Moroni. But what's going to be happening to these prisoners? I know we keep pausing in these stories and I keep having you put a pin in something, but would you do that here too?
We're going to talk about them next lesson.
Yeah, we are. What's going to become of those prisoners? We will talk about them next time. Will they change their minds about the Nephites? Stay tuned next time for the surprising answer. So, look at this. What a mess. I'm looking at this, just even this battle with Jacob, and I just think about where the carnal man takes us. Remember, the carnal man, the natural man, is man without God. It's greed, it's seeking for power. Why did the Lamanites leave the safety of their fortifications in the city of Mulek? Why was it tempting Teancum's small army? It was so tempting it led to their complete defeat just because they thought, you know what, we could kill those guys. They came down when tempted, where they could gain power. Satan does not support his children. He leads them into bondage, and look where the Lamanites ended up. They ended up in bondage. Now, it'll be the best thing that ever happens to them, but still, this is a great example of what happens when we seek for the traits of the natural man. They lead us into stupid paths that cause damage and ultimately lead to our bondage.
Well, and speaking of stupid paths, let's recall at the beginning of this lesson, the reason that we're having this war is because the Nephite dissenter groups who were wealthy and prideful were mad at the people of Ammon for being nice to the people that they kicked out.
Yikes.
That's why we're fighting.
Oh, wow.
And, well, I mean, it was fanned further by Amalickiah's quest for world domination, but that's...
Right. Well, that's the other story. But it's, we've got to be careful because even though we're looking at this as big national events, these same battles play out in our own lives. These same traits that lead these people either into bondage or destruction or to whatever, we've got to be aware of those in our personal lives.
Well, look at the local skirmish with Morianton.
Yeah.
Look at the impact that had. We need to be watching everything in our own personal lives and the people that we come in contact with.
So our friends, as we've covered the first half of what are sometimes called the war chapters, I hope you found some lessons in there that relate to you. There are exciting stories, there are big heroes, there are terrible villains, but all of these things play out in spiritual and doctrinal truths. And I hope you had a good journey with us.
Keep looking for gems. Remember, when you find a gem, it's yours. And share it. We look forward to talking to you more about this in our next lesson.
Well, that's if you're not tired of listening to us by then. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is not officially affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
But we're really big fans.